Hi guys, and welcome to the Gentle History podcast. Tonight we squeeze ourselves into a canvas-covered wagon in the year 1850, settle among blankets, barrels, children, tools, and far too many possessions, and begin rolling west beneath a sky that already looks slightly suspicious. The wheels creak beneath you. Oxen breathe clouds into the cold morning air. Somewhere behind the wagon, a child asks whether Oregon is close yet, which is an ambitious question considering you still have an alarming amount of continent ahead. And tonight, winter is coming early. You probably won't survive this if your wilderness experience consists mainly of forgetting your umbrella on the way to the supermarket. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. It is always strangely comforting to imagine people relaxing together across different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights and listen to the slow wooden complaint of the wagon beneath you. Creak, pause, creak again. The sound follows the turning wheels with such regularity that after several days you barely notice it. At first, every groan makes you wonder whether some essential piece of wood is preparing to detach itself and remain permanently on the prairie. Eventually you learn that wagons simply have opinions about travel. This one appears to dislike most of it. You walk beside it more often than you ride inside. That may seem surprising. A covered wagon looks like transportation after all. You naturally imagine yourself sitting comfortably beneath the canvas while oxen carry you west. Unfortunately, your wagon has other ideas. Every pound matters. Inside are sacks of flour, bacon, beans, coffee, cooking utensils, spare clothing, blankets, tools, ammunition, medicine, rope, buckets, perhaps a small chest containing family possessions, and whatever sentimental objects survived the painful argument about what could come and what had to remain behind. There is very little space left for you. Walking also saves the animals from carrying unnecessary weight. So you place one boot in front of the other, while the wagon crawls beside you at roughly the speed of a determined pedestrian. This is one of the basic realities of the Great Overland Migrations. During the peak years of Oregon Trail travel, many emigrants walked enormous portions of the route, rather than riding comfortably inside their wagons. Oxen became especially popular draft animals because they were strong, comparatively affordable, and capable of surviving on rough grazing better than many horses. They are not glamorous. Nobody looks at an ox and thinks speed, but glamour becomes considerably less important when your household is attempting to cross roughly 2,000 miles of rivers, plains, deserts, and mountains. The ox beside you lowers its head. Its shoulders move beneath the wooden yoke. Leather creaks. A chain gives a soft metallic clink. Then another wheel rolls through a shallow rut. You glance upward. The sky is grey. Not dramatic grey. Not yet. It is simply the flat, enormous grey of a day that cannot quite decide what it intends to become. The prairie around you seems even larger beneath it. Grass bends in the wind. The wagon train stretches ahead in an uneven line. Pale canvas covers moving slowly across the landscape like strange rectangular sails. Behind you, the eastern horizon has already swallowed everything familiar. That is perhaps the most unsettling part. There is no quick return now. Home exists somewhere behind you, but distance has begun turning it into memory. You think of a kitchen table, a proper mattress, a door that closes without requiring ropes, a roof that does not flap. These suddenly seem like magnificent achievements of civilization. Inside the wagon, one of the children complains about being cold. Another immediately insists that they are not cold at all. Children possess a remarkable ability to disagree even when both are visibly shivering. You reach beneath the canvas and pull out another wool covering. The interior smells of canvas, flour dust, leather, wood, and people who have been travelling for quite some time without enjoying the bathing facilities expected by modern society. There is also bacon somewhere. You can smell that too. possibly because bacon grease has found its way onto almost everything you own. A curious detail from emigrant life is how frequently travellers recorded seemingly tiny domestic annoyances alongside genuinely serious dangers. Diaries can move from descriptions of river crossings or sickness to complaints about cooking, damaged clothing, troublesome livestock, or missing household objects with almost comic speed. Human priorities remain wonderfully stubborn. You may be crossing a continent, but somebody still wants to know where the spoon went. The youngest child has apparently decided that the spoon is not their responsibility. This seems unlikely. You keep walking. The wind strengthens during the afternoon. Nothing dramatic happens. That almost makes it more uncomfortable. A violent storm announces itself clearly. This weather merely follows you. Cold air slips beneath your collar. You tighten your coat. Ahead, another emigrant turns and studies the clouds. Someone farther along the train points toward the west. There is a short conversation you cannot hear. Then everyone continues. Stopping without good reason costs daylight, and daylight is precious. Each day has a rhythm built around it. You wake early, prepare food, gather animals, load whatever was removed overnight and begin moving. At midday there may be a brief pause. Toward evening the wagons stop again. Livestock needs grazing and water. Fires must be made, meals cooked, bedding arranged, equipment checked. Then tomorrow repeats the arrangement. You begin measuring life in miles, 10 miles, 15, perhaps 20 on unusually favourable ground. Modern distance has spoiled you. 20 miles sounds almost trivial when a car can cover it while you complain about traffic and adjust the radio. Out here, 20 miles can represent an entire day of feet, hooves, wheels, dust, sweat, arguments, repairs, and patience. And Oregon remains very far away. Historians continue to debate exactly how emigrants psychologically understood that distance before departure, especially how closely expectations formed from guidebooks, letters, rumours, and promotional accounts match the physical reality of months on the trail. Knowing that a journey is long is one thing. Feeling its length through your boots is another. By late afternoon, your legs understand geography better than any map. A child peers through the opening in the canvas. Are we stopping soon? You look toward the sun, though there is hardly any sun to see. Soon? This is one of those wonderfully flexible adult words. Soon can mean 5 minutes. Soon can mean an hour. On the Oregon Trail, soon occasionally seems capable of meaning Wyoming. The wagon continues forward. You notice that the grass has become damp. At first you assume it is leftover moisture from earlier in the day, but then something touches your cheek. A tiny drop. You wipe it away. Another follows. Rain. Very light rain. Nobody appears concerned. Rain is ordinary. Rain settles dust. Rain provides water. Rain can even feel refreshing after days beneath an open sky. Still, you look west again. The clouds there are darker now. The wind carries a sharper edge. The oxen seem quieter, although perhaps you are imagining it. Your family has already endured uncomfortable nights. You have slept through wind. You have awakened beneath damp canvas. You have eaten meals seasoned with smoke, grit, and the occasional mysterious crunch that everyone politely pretends not to notice. A little rain should not matter. You tell yourself this while another cold drop lands against your face, then another. By the time the wagons finally stop, the drizzle has become steady enough to darken the canvas. Camp forms slowly. Animals are unyoked. Children climb down stiffly. Someone gathers fuel while another person searches for a reasonably dry place to build a fire. There is no reasonably dry place. You choose the least unreasonable one. Smoke curls sideways in the wind. The fire struggles. Your hands feel clumsy as you prepare supper, fingers reddened by the cold. A pot warms above the flames while everyone gathers closer than usual. The children eat quickly. One asks whether snow can fall this early. You almost laugh. Almost. Instead, you look toward the western horizon. The temperature is dropping. Rain taps softly against canvas. Tap, tap, tap. This sound should be soothing. Perhaps under a solid roof it would be. Tonight it feels like someone quietly knocking at the door, and somewhere beyond the darkness, colder air is moving toward you. The rain continues through the night. You hear it before you properly wake, a soft restless patter against the canvas above your face. For several sleepy moments, you remain wrapped in your blanket and pretend that you are somewhere else. Perhaps the sound belongs to rain striking the roof of a farmhouse. Perhaps there is a fireplace nearby. Perhaps breakfast will appear without requiring anyone to kneel beside wet grass and persuade damp wood to burn. Then the wagon shifts beneath you. A child coughs. An ox gives a low call somewhere outside, and reality politely returns. The canvas roof is only a few feet above your head. The air smells damp. Everything feels cold. You push yourself upright carefully because there are sleeping bodies. Bundles, boxes and supplies arranged around you with the precision of a puzzle nobody particularly enjoys solving. Another cough comes from the far side of the wagon. This one is deeper. You turn toward the sound. One of your companions has been feeling poorly since yesterday afternoon. Nothing alarming at first. A little tiredness, a scratchy throat. Perhaps the beginnings of a cold brought on by days of exposure and exhaustion. Now the face beneath the blanket looks pale. You touch the forehead. Warm. That is not encouraging. Outside, someone calls for the animals to be gathered. The wagon company intends to move. Of course it does. You cannot simply wait whenever someone develops a cough. Illness is too common for that, and autumn weather is beginning to matter more with every passing day. So the morning routine starts. You climb down. Your boots immediately sink into mud. There's a deeply unpleasant sound as you pull one free. The trail has transformed overnight. Yesterday it was packed earth marked by wheels and hooves. This morning it resembles brown paste. Rainwater fills every depression. Wagon tracks have become narrow channels. Mud clings to your boots in thick layers, making each foot feel heavier. The oxen are wet. Their hides shine darkly. Steam rises faintly from their bodies when they breathe. You run a hand along one animal's flank and feel the cold moisture beneath your palm. The creature turns its head toward you, with an expression that seems remarkably judgmental. Yes, you know, nobody is enjoying this. By the middle of the 19th century, experienced overland travellers understood that weather could alter travel conditions astonishingly quickly. Heavy rain turned trails into mud, swollen streams complicated crossings, and wet conditions increased the strain on both animals and wagons. Emigrant diaries repeatedly describe days when progress slowed dramatically, because wheels sank or roads became nearly impassable. The Oregon Trail does not need cliffs or dramatic ambushes to inconvenience you. Sometimes it simply becomes sticky. The wagons begin moving, slowly, very slowly. The wheels press deep into the softened earth. Oxen lean forward, harness and yokes creak. Mud sucks at wooden rims. You walk beside the wagon, shoulders hunched against the rain. After perhaps an hour, water has found every weakness in your clothing. It runs from your hat, it creeps down the back of your neck. Your sleeves are damp. Your trousers feel heavy. There is something particularly exhausting about being wet in cold weather. You cannot escape the sensation. Every movement reminds you of it. Inside the wagon, the children are allowed to ride more than usual. Normally their weight would be another burden for the animals, but nobody wants small children trudging through cold mud for hours. They sit beneath blankets. One peers through the opening. Another has fallen asleep against a sack of flour. The sick traveller coughs again. You hear it through the canvas. That sound follows you for several miles. Rain, creaking wheels, cough, rain, hooves, cough. By midday you stop briefly. There is little enthusiasm for cooking. Cold food is easier. You pass around bread that has begun acquiring the toughness of building material. Someone cuts slices of bacon. A child asks whether there is anything sweet. There is not. The child looks personally betrayed by the 19th century. One peculiar feature of trail provisioning is the amount of improvisation required as journeys continued. Travellers began with carefully planned stores, but damaged containers, damp flour, spoiled food, unexpected delays, and simple appetite could change those plans. Even something as ordinary as keeping flour dry became important when your kitchen, pantry, bedroom and transport vehicle were essentially the same wooden box. You inspect one sack nervously, still dry. Excellent. Civilization survives another afternoon, then you look at the sky. The rain seems thinner. That should be good news. It is not. The drops landing on your coat feel different, sharper, colder. You hold out your hand. A tiny white grain lands against your skin and disappears. You stare at the wet spot. Another falls. Then another. Sleet. Someone nearby notices too. Conversation moves along the wagon train, not panic. Not yet, just awareness. People tighten clothing and check blankets. A few drivers urge their teams forward more firmly. You return to the wagon. The sick traveller is awake. How far today? You hesitate. Not far. There is no reason to pretend otherwise. The fever seems stronger. You offer water. The cup shakes slightly in cold fingers. Medical care on the trail is limited, and the understanding of infectious disease in 1850 remains incomplete. Germ theory has not yet transformed ordinary medical practice. Families carry remedies they trust. Physicians may be travelling with larger companies, and practical nursing often falls to relatives or fellow emigrants. Rest, warmth, water. Those simple things matter enormously. Unfortunately, the trail currently provides very little of the first two. Historians have long discussed how much mortality and illness on Western trails resulted from specific diseases compared with the broader effects of exhaustion, poor sanitation, contaminated water, inadequate nutrition, and exposure. Surviving diaries give vivid evidence, but they do not always provide diagnoses that modern medicine would recognize with certainty. Your concern is less scholarly. Someone you care about is getting sicker, and the weather is getting colder. You climb down again. The afternoon becomes a struggle measured in yards rather than miles. A wagon ahead sinks deeply into a rut. Everyone stops. Several people gather around the wheel. You push. Mud coats your hands. Someone shouts to the oxen. The wheel rises reluctantly, slides, then finally catches firmer ground. For approximately 3 seconds, everyone feels victorious. Then another wagon gets stuck. You almost admire the trail's sense of timing. By late afternoon, sleet has replaced most of the rain. It rattles faintly against the wagon canvas. The wind grows stronger. Your wet clothing now feels dangerously cold. People begin discussing camp. Normally you would search for water, grass, and some shelter from the wind. Tonight the choices are poor. The landscape offers little protection. You continue because stopping here seems foolish. Then you continue because stopping there seems equally foolish. The children have become quiet. That worries you more than complaining would. One sits wrapped in a blanket, watching the pale pellets strike the canvas. The sick traveller barely speaks. You touch that forehead again, still hot. Outside, your fingers are becoming numb. The contradiction feels almost absurd. Too much heat inside one body, not enough anywhere else. Evening approaches beneath a sky that seems to have lowered itself toward the earth. The sleet changes again. At first you do not notice. Then a white flake settles on your sleeve. It remains there. Another lands beside it, then 5 more. The grass along the trail begins losing its colour beneath a thin white dusting. You hear someone farther ahead call out. The wagon's slow. You look west. The horizon has disappeared. There's no clear line between earth and sky anymore. Only grey, only white, only wind. And suddenly the miserable rain you've spent all day resenting begins to seem like the pleasant part of the weather. The first serious snow arrives almost politely. A few flakes settle on the wagon tongue. Several collect along the shoulders of your coat. One lands on the back of your hand and remains there just long enough for you to see its delicate shape before melting against your skin. For a moment, it is beautiful. That is inconvenient. Dangerous things really ought to look more dangerous. Instead, the prairie begins whitening with a softness that would seem peaceful if you were observing it through a glass window beside a warm stove. You are not. You're standing in mud beside a covered wagon with cold children, a feverish traveller, tired oxen, wet clothing, and no building visible in any direction. The wind strengthens. Snow begins falling sideways. Ahead, the wagon train becomes strangely indistinct. The nearest wagon is clear enough, but the neck seems pale and blurred. Beyond that, canvas covers appear and disappear behind curtains of white. You keep moving. For now, that seems safer than stopping. The trail beneath you is still visible, though barely. Parallel wheel ruts run through the accumulating snow, and hoofprints mark the soft ground between them. You follow those tracks carefully. Then the wind sweeps across them. Within minutes their edges soften, a little later some disappear entirely. This is where the enormous openness of the plains becomes less romantic. There are no street signs, no glowing windows, no conveniently placed service station where you can purchase hot coffee and complain dramatically about the weather. There may be recognizable hills, streams, rock formations, river valleys, trees, or established wagon tracks. But when blowing snow hides those features, navigation becomes frighteningly uncertain. Trail travellers often depended on visible landmarks and well-worn routes, particularly by the middle years of the Great Migration, when thousands of wagons had already crossed sections of the same country. Yet established tracks were not magical roads. Weather, mud, grass, river changes, and countless branching wagon marks could make the correct route difficult to identify. Today the snow is erasing everything. Someone ahead shouts. The words vanish in the wind. You hear only fragments. Keep close. That part reaches you. You turn toward the wagon. The children are still beneath the canvas. Good. You count them automatically. 1, 2, everyone present. The sick traveller lies beneath several blankets now. You cannot tell whether the shivering comes from fever or cold. Probably both. You pull the canvas flap tighter. Stay inside. Nobody argues. That is how you know conditions have become serious. Normally telling children to remain somewhere produces an immediate desire to be anywhere else. You return to the oxen. Snow collects on their backs. They lower their heads into the wind and continue with the slow patience that has carried you across so much country already. You feel grateful for them in a way that would have sounded ridiculous months ago. Your entire world is attached to these animals. Food, clothing, shelter, medicine, children, future plans. Everything rolls behind a pair of patient shoulders. A gust strikes the wagon broadside. The canvas snaps violently. One child cries out. You reach for a rope and check the fastening. Still secure. Another gust arrives. The wagon rocks slightly. Not much. Enough. You glance toward the driver of the wagon ahead. He raises an arm. Stop. The line slows. People gather briefly, leaning close together so they can hear. You catch pieces of the conversation. The trail is difficult to see. A shallow rise ahead might provide some protection. Someone thinks there may be a creek farther west. Another traveller says continuing blindly could take the company away from the established route. Nobody knows exactly how far the storm extends. That is the cruel little mystery of bad weather before forecasts. You cannot open a device and watch a cheerful coloured map explain that conditions improve 14 miles ahead. You have the sky, the wind, your judgment, and several people offering completely different opinions with impressive confidence. A curious element in 19th century travel accounts is the attention given to weather signs. People watched cloud formations, animal behaviour, wind direction, temperature changes, sunsets, and countless bits of inherited weather wisdom. Some observations were sensible, others belonged more comfortably beside folklore. One old belief, repeated in various frontier communities, suggests that certain animal behaviours can predict severe weather with remarkable accuracy. Your oxen currently predict that they would prefer not to be here. You consider this scientifically convincing. The decision is made to continue a little farther. The wagons move again. You stay close enough to touch yours. Visibility worsens. Snow stings your cheeks. You lower your head. Your eyelashes collect moisture. Your boots, already soaked from the morning mud, begin feeling strangely distant from your feet. You flex your toes while walking. Still there. Excellent. Small victories. The landscape contracts. Earlier today you could see miles of prairie. Now your world extends perhaps 50 yards, then 30, sometimes less. A wagon appears through the white haze like a ghost, remains visible for several seconds, then fades again. The sound becomes almost more important than sight. You listen for wheels, for oxen, for voices, for the occasional metallic clatter of equipment. As long as you hear those things, the company still exists around you. Historians continue to argue about how frequently emigrant parties face truly unexpected severe snowstorms on the central portions of the overland trails, compared with storms encountered in mountain regions later in the season. Diaries vary enormously by year, route, departure date, and location, which makes any single dramatic experience a poor description of every journey. You're not thinking about statistical frequency. Once is enough. A sudden gust sweeps across the trail. For several seconds you see almost nothing. You stop walking, the wagon is beside you, your hand presses against wet canvas. You wait. The gust weakens, shapes return. Someone shouts from ahead. This time the message travels backward from wagon to wagon. Stop! Stop here! You look around. Here? There is almost nothing here. A low fold in the land offers a little protection from the worst of the wind, but calling it shelter requires generosity. Still darkness is approaching. The trail is disappearing. Animals are exhausted. People are wet. The sick cannot continue indefinitely. The choice has been made for you. The wagon slows to a final creak. The oxen stop. Immediately the cold seems stronger. Movement had been keeping some warmth in your body. Standing still allows the wind to find every wet layer of clothing. People begin working. Nobody needs a speech. Animals must be secured. Wagons positioned. Canvas checked. Fuel found. Snow cleared where possible. You reach for the nearest child as they climb carefully down. Their hand feels cold inside yours. Stay close. The wind carries snow around your legs. Another wagon emerges from the whiteness and stops nearby. Then another. Gradually the company gathers into a rough cluster. The storm has removed the road. Now it removes the horizon. Soon it will remove daylight. You look at your wagon. 10 feet or so of wooden bed, a curved canvas roof, a few blankets, supplies packed tightly inside. Until this moment it has been transportation. Tonight it must become something else. A house, a sick room, a nursery, a kitchen, a refuge. And while snow begins collecting around the wheels, you realise that nobody can say whether you will be here for one night or several. The moment the wagon stops, the storm begins trying to claim it. Snow gathers against the wheels almost immediately. Wind pushes loose powder beneath the wagon bed and around the wooden spokes. The canvas cover bows inward with each hard gust, then snaps back into shape with a deep fluttering sound. You stand beside it for several seconds, staring. There is something deeply unfair about being expected to build a comfortable camp when the weather is actively dismantling the concept of comfort. Still, standing and staring will not improve matters. You begin with the oxen. Their yokes must come off. Cold fingers struggle with leather and wooden fittings that were simple to handle yesterday. Snow melts against your hands, then the wind chills the moisture until your knuckles ache. The animals shift impatiently. You speak to them quietly. Whether this reassures the oxen or merely reassures you is difficult to determine, probably both. Once freed from the wagon, they cannot simply wander away to graze as they might on an ordinary evening. Visibility is too poor. If an animal disappears into the white darkness, finding it could become dangerous or impossible. So ropes are checked. Animals are kept close. Someone in the company begins arranging wagons to provide whatever protection their wooden bodies can offer. The neat travelling line disappears. Tonight there is no reason to preserve order for the trail. You need shelter. You turn back toward your wagon. Snow already covers the step. Inside, the children wait among blankets and supplies. The sick traveller lies against bundled bedding, eyes half closed. You climb inside. The difference is immediate, not warmth. Certainly not warmth, but the wind loses its teeth. Canvas is not a wall, yet even thin material changes how cold feels when it blocks moving air. Outside, the wind tears heat from your wet clothing. Inside, the air remains bitter but comparatively still. You pull the opening closed. For several seconds, everyone listens. The storm sounds larger from inside. Canvas rattle above you. Wind whistles through tiny gaps. Snow brushes against the cover with a dry whisper. The wagon rocks slightly. A child looks upward. Can it blow over? Wonderful question. Exactly the sort of question you were hoping nobody would ask. You explain that the wagon is heavy. This is true. You explain that the wheels are settling into the ground. Also true. You avoid mentioning that you have absolutely no interest in testing the limits of 19th century wagon aerodynamics. The child accepts this answer. You begin rearranging the interior. Ordinarily, the wagon is organized for movement. Heavy supplies sit low. Frequently used objects remain accessible. Bedding is rolled or folded. Tools are positioned where they will not bounce around. Tonight the priorities change. You need sleeping space. You need access to food. You need the medicine chest. You need dry clothing. Most importantly, you need somewhere for the sick traveller to rest without being stepped on by children every 12 minutes. Covered wagons used by emigrants were typically practical freight vehicles rather than luxurious passenger coaches. The relatively compact beds carried enormous amounts of household equipment and provisions, leaving limited room for sleeping adults. Many emigrants normally slept outside when weather permitted. Tonight, weather does not permit anything, so 6 feet of inconvenience must somehow become a bedroom. You shift a flour sack, move a wooden box, stack cooking equipment more tightly. A blanket is spread over the wagon bed. Another is folded beneath the sick traveller. The children are assigned narrow spaces. Everyone becomes extremely interested in exactly where everyone else's elbows are located. Move your foot. I did? No, you didn't. Yes, I did. The Oregon Trail may lead toward a new life, but sibling diplomacy remains approximately where civilization left it. You interrupt before negotiations collapse. Outside, voices pass between wagons. Someone needs rope. Another family has spare rope. Someone asks for an axe. Another person is searching for dry fuel. You climb outside again. The cold feels shocking after only a few minutes behind canvas. Snow reaches above the soles of your boots now. The accumulation is uneven because the wind moves it constantly, stripping one patch nearly bare while building a drift somewhere else. You inspect the wagon cover. Canvas stretches over curved wooden boughs rising from the wagon bed. The cover is tied securely, but one section has loosened. You tighten it. A torn or badly loosened cover tonight would be more than annoying. It would expose everyone inside to blowing snow and wind. There are accounts of emigrants using extra blankets, quilts, pieces of canvas, clothing, and even spare sacks to block drafts or reinforce shelter when conditions became miserable. Frontier practicality rarely cares whether an object is being used for its intended purpose. A quilt can be bedding, it can be a curtain, it can cover supplies, it can plug a gap. Given sufficient desperation, you suspect it could probably become architecture. One lesser-known curiosity concerns wagon covers themselves. Popular images often show them as permanently bright white, but actual canvas quickly collected dust, smoke, grease, rain stains, and trail dirt. After months of travel, your wagon is considerably less picturesque than the version destined for future paintings. At the moment, snow is improving its appearance. You would happily accept uglier weather. Near the rear wheel, you begin moving snow away from the wagon. It feels absurd. More fools while you work. But keeping the immediate area manageable matters. You need access beneath and around the wagon, and drifting snow could make movement increasingly difficult. Several travellers help one another. Nobody discusses whether assistance will be repaid. Tonight accounting can wait. A gust hits hard enough to make everyone turn away. You crouch beside the wagon until it passes. Someone nearby says the temperature is falling. You believe them. The wet cuffs of your clothing are beginning to stiffen. Back inside, the sick traveller coughs again. You hear it even through the storm. That decides the next priority. You climb into the wagon and check the fever. Still strong. The patient asks for water. You offer a cup. Only a little remains in the container. More must be obtained somehow. Snow is everywhere, of course, but snow does not instantly become useful drinking water. It must be melted, which requires heat, which requires fuel, which requires somebody to find and protect that fuel. Every solution creates another problem. Researchers continue to disagree about how consistently emigrant companies organize themselves during sudden emergencies. Some parties had established leadership and rules, while others relied on informal cooperation that changed according to circumstances, personality, experience, and necessity. Tonight your little group behaves less like a military expedition and more like a neighbourhood that has accidentally been dropped into a freezer. People simply notice what needs doing. One person checks animals, another gathers fuel, someone helps reinforce canvas, another visits the families with small children. You begin to understand why travelling completely alone is such a frightening prospect. Independence sounds admirable until you need 3 pairs of hands at once. Darkness settles quickly. The world beyond the wagon disappears. A lantern glows briefly outside, its light blurred by snow. Then it moves away. Inside, you arrange the children beneath blankets. Wet outer clothing hangs wherever it can. The smell is extraordinary. Damp wool, canvas, leather, human breath, medicine, old smoke, and the faint persistent aroma of bacon. Apparently bacon intends to survive everything. You sit near the opening and listen. The wagon gives another small wooden groan. Snow whispers against the canvas. The sick traveller breathes unevenly. A child presses closer to you. Outside, the wind continues without any sign of exhaustion. You cannot make the wagon warm. Not yet. You cannot make the storm stop. You cannot promise that morning will bring clear skies. But you can tighten the canvas. You can share blankets. You can keep everyone close. You can watch the sick. And for tonight, this cramped wooden box on 2 buried axles is the closest thing you have to home. The children discover very quickly that a wagon becomes smaller when nobody is allowed to leave it. During ordinary travel, its narrow interior is merely inconvenient. You reach inside for supplies, perhaps shelter there during rain, occasionally allow someone tired or unwell to ride, and then return to the enormous open landscape. Tonight, that landscape might as well have vanished. There is only canvas, wood, blankets, boxes, bodies, and the restless breathing of someone with a fever. The youngest child lies curled beside you with knees drawn upward. Another occupies a narrow strip near the wagon wall, carefully protecting a tiny collection of personal possessions as though defending an estate. Every child on a long migration wants something that belongs only to them. Perhaps a doll, a small book, a carved toy, a ribbon, a pebble collected beside some river hundreds of miles behind you for reasons nobody else understands. These objects are nearly worthless by the standards of survival. That makes them strangely important. When nearly everything familiar has been left behind, a little wooden animal or scrap of cloth can become a portable piece of home. One child holds a doll against the blanket. The doll has suffered. Its dress is dirty. Its hair has achieved the sort of appearance normally associated with surviving a tornado. Nevertheless, it remains treasured. The wind pushes against the canvas. Everyone looks upward. The youngest child moves closer. You say nothing. Instead, you tuck the blanket around small shoulders and pretend that this is simply another night. Children notice more than adults prefer to admit, but they also borrow their sense of danger from the people around them. If every grown person begins shouting, fear spreads quickly. If voices remain low and ordinary, the world can feel slightly less threatening. So you talk about breakfast. This is optimism disguised as meal planning. What do you think we should eat? The question produces immediate disagreement. Bacon, biscuits, something sweet. There is another request for something sweet. Apparently the storm has not altered this priority. You explain that breakfast depends on what can actually be cooked. This answer receives little enthusiasm. You begin telling a story instead, not an exciting one. Exciting stories seem unnecessary when the weather is already providing special effects. You describe a farm you remember, a kitchen, a stubborn chicken. The children listen. Outside, snow continues brushing the wagon cover. For emigrant families, children were not merely passive passengers. Older children frequently helped with daily work by gathering fuel, tending younger siblings, driving livestock, fetching water, preparing camp, or assisting with countless household tasks. Their responsibilities depended on age, family circumstances, and the demands of the journey. The trail does not contain a separate children's department. Everyone participates, yet tonight there is very little they can safely do. That creates its own problem. A bored child is energetic. A frightened child is watchful. A bored and frightened child trapped inside 10 feet of wagon possesses almost supernatural abilities to ask questions. How long will it snow? You do not know. Will the oxen freeze? You hope not. Can snow break the wagon? Possibly, but there is absolutely no benefit in mentioning that. Are we still going to Oregon? Yes. That answer comes quickly. You're grateful for one question that allows confidence. The children settle again. One begins tracing a finger through condensation that has gathered along a cold surface near the wagon bed. Breath fills the cramped shelter with moisture. The canvas above remains cold enough that dampness becomes another quiet enemy. Blankets already carry traces of yesterday's rain. Clothing hangs nearby, but nothing seems interested in drying. You touch a wool garment, still damp, wonderful. There is a particular misery in putting on cold, wet clothing, and tomorrow appears determined to provide that experience. A small argument begins over blanket territory. One child insists another has taken too much. The accused party denies everything while visibly wrapped in approximately 3/4 of the disputed blanket. You redistribute it. Peace returns, briefly. One unusual detail in some emigrant recollections is how games and ordinary childhood amusement continue even during difficult journeys. Children invent entertainment from stones, sticks, scraps, animals, wagon parts, and whatever happens to be available. Commercial toys are precious because space is limited, but imagination weighs nothing and requires no room in the wagon. Tonight, even whispering games help. You ask everyone to identify sounds: wind, canvas, an ox, someone walking outside, the wagon creaking, a cough. That last sound ends the game. The sick traveller turns beneath the blankets. You lean over. The face looks flushed in the dim light. You offer another small drink of water. The children watch. You wish they would look elsewhere. They do not. Illness is not hidden from children on the trail as easily as it might be in a larger house. There is no separate bedroom behind a closed door. There may be no physician nearby. Nursing happens within inches of everyone else. One child asks quietly whether the patient will be all right. You answer carefully. We're taking care of them. That is true. It is also the only promise you can safely make. The child nods. Then, after a pause, places the battered doll beside the sick traveller's blanket. No announcement, no explanation. Just a temporary loan. You look away for a moment. The storm continues. Historical interpretation remains divided over how deeply children understood the risks of overland migration while they were experiencing them. Adult memoirs written decades later can transform childhood memories, while diaries kept closer to events reveal everything from excitement and curiosity to grief, exhaustion, and fear. Childhood on the trail was never one single experience. Inside your wagon, it changes by the hour. A few minutes later, someone laughs. Quietly. One child has discovered that if you press your face against a certain fold of canvas while the wind blows, the fabric briefly shapes itself around your nose. This is apparently hilarious. Soon another child tries. You should stop them. You do not. The laughter is soft and slightly ridiculous. It changes the wagon. For perhaps 30 seconds, the shelter feels less like a trap. You remember that children can carry fear and amusement simultaneously. Adults can too. You adjust the blankets again. The youngest child's eyelids begin to droop. Another continues whispering questions but pauses longer between them. You tell the farm story again. This time you add a cow that repeatedly escapes through a broken fence. The cow becomes more intelligent with each telling. Eventually it appears capable of opening gates. Historical accuracy is sacrificed for morale. The wagon rocks gently. Wind becomes a low continuous roar beyond the canvas. You speak more slowly. One child falls asleep, then another. The little doll remains beside the sick traveller. You sit in the darkness listening to several different rhythms of breathing. Small breaths, deep breaths, uneven breaths. Outside there are hundreds of miles of open country. Inside there are only inches between one sleeping person and the next. You pull the blanket higher around the nearest child. Your own legs ache, your back complains, your feet remain cold, but you do not move. The children have finally found sleep, and disturbing this arrangement would require negotiations beyond your present strength. So you remain exactly where you are while snow gathers around the wagon, guarding this tiny, crowded world until someone beside you coughs again. This time the cough does not stop quickly. The coughing comes in a long, uneven spell. You lean closer in the darkness, one hand searching for the water cup while the other steadies the blankets. The sick traveller struggles upright, breath catching between each cough. Around you the children stir. One opens sleepy eyes. Another rolls closer to the wagon wall. The borrowed doll remains beside the patient, staring upward with the serene expression of someone contributing absolutely nothing to the medical situation. You find the cup. Only a little water remains. You offer it slowly. The coughing eventually eases. For a while there is only breathing. Too fast, too shallow. You place your palm against the forehead again. Hot. Definitely hotter. The strange contrast continues. Your own fingers ache with cold while the skin beneath them burns with fever. You begin wondering what exactly you're dealing with. A cold? Influenza? Pneumonia? Something picked up from contaminated water days earlier? You cannot know. In 1850, diagnosis on an emigrant trail is often based on visible symptoms and whatever medical experience happens to exist within the company. Modern laboratory tests belong to another world. Even professional physicians of the period work within a medical system that is changing but still limited by incomplete knowledge of infection and disease. For you, the immediate questions are simpler. Can the patient drink? Can they breathe comfortably? Are they conscious? Can you keep them warm? You adjust the blankets. The sick traveller whispers that the wagon feels cold. You almost laugh at the understatement. Instead, you add another covering. That blanket has to come from somewhere. You take it from your own legs. The cold reaches you almost immediately. Wonderful. Frontier nursing offers many opportunities for generosity and very few for comfortable knees. Outside, footsteps crunch through the snow. A voice calls softly. Someone is checking neighbouring wagons. You open the canvas just enough to answer. Wind pushes snow through the gap. The visitor asks whether anyone needs help. You mention the fever. A few minutes later, another traveller arrives carrying a small box of remedies and the confidence of someone who has treated illness before, not a physician. But experience counts for a great deal here. The person climbs inside, bringing snow on boots and shoulders. Space becomes even tighter. The patient is examined by lantern light. Pulse, breathing, forehead, questions. How long has the cough lasted? When did the fever begin? Has there been vomiting, pain, chills? You answer as best you can. The conclusion is not especially satisfying. Keep the patient resting. Give fluids. Maintain warmth. Watch the breathing. In other words, continue doing everything you are already doing. One established fact about 19th century overland travel is that disease killed far more emigrants than dramatic confrontations did. Cholera became especially notorious on the trails during epidemic years, while dysentery, respiratory illness, measles, accidents, and other conditions also threatened travellers. The popular imagination enjoys danger with noise. Disease is quieter. It enters a wagon with a cough. The visitor opens the medicine box. There are bottles, powders, perhaps laudanum, maybe quinine, various household preparations. You regard them cautiously. Medical chests carried west could contain substances that modern patients would recognize, alongside treatments that would now inspire considerably less confidence. The temptation to do something is powerful. When someone you love is sick, simply watching feels unbearable. Yet a remedy is not automatically helpful, merely because it tastes terrible. And 19th century medicine has an impressive ability to make treatments taste terrible. The visitor recommends nothing drastic for now. You are relieved. A curious bit of trail culture is the persistence of home remedies passed between families. Mustard preparations, herbal teas, poultices, alcohol-based mixtures, camphor, various oils and other treatments appear in domestic medical traditions. Advice travels almost as easily as wagons do. Someone always knows what their grandmother used. Grandmothers apparently form an unofficial medical college spanning the continent. The visitor leaves. Cold air enters again when the canvas opens. You secure it quickly. The patient shivers. You tuck the blanket closer. Now comes the water problem. The cup is nearly empty. Outside, snow is abundant enough to bury a small building, yet converting it into drinking water requires effort. You climb out. The wind has weakened slightly, though snow continues falling heavily. Another traveller crouches beside a protected little fire several wagons away. You carry a container toward it. Your boots sink deeply. Snow reaches your ankles, then your lower legs where drifting has accumulated. The camp looks unreal. Lantern light glows behind canvas. Wagons appear as dark shapes beneath whitening covers. People move between them like shadows. You collect relatively clean snow from an undisturbed patch. The container looks full. Then the snow melts. It becomes a disappointing amount of water. You add more, then more. Snow contains a great deal of air, a fact you understand intellectually but find personally insulting tonight. Eventually there is enough. You warm it rather than boiling away precious fuel unnecessarily, then carry the water back. Inside, the children are awake again. One asks whether it is morning. No. How long until morning? You have no idea. Sleep? A deeply unpopular answer. You settle beside the patient. The warm water helps. Only slightly, but slightly matters. The fever remains. The coughing comes and goes. At times the patient sleeps. At others, restless movements disturb the blankets. You listen to every breath. There is a long-running discussion among medical historians about how much ordinary emigrant survival depended on formal medical knowledge compared with practical nursing, hydration, rest, sanitation, luck, and the body's own ability to recover. Sources often tell us what treatments people attempted, but proving exactly what helped an individual patient can be much harder. Tonight you possess no historian's distance. Every change feels important. A quieter cough gives you hope. A difficult breath takes it away. You count breaths without realizing you are doing it. The storm keeps its own rhythm outside. Wind, canvas, breathing. Wind, canvas, cough. Eventually the patient opens their eyes. Children, sleeping. This is approximately true. One child is clearly pretending. The patient nods. Cold? We're managing. Another carefully selected truth. You offer more water. The cup is accepted. A few swallows. Good. You place it nearby. Hours seem to pass without any clear boundary between them. There are no clocks demanding your attention. Only darkness, cold, the gradual shrinking of the lantern flame. You think about tomorrow. If the storm continues, the patient cannot walk. If the wagon moves, they must ride. If the trail remains buried, perhaps nobody moves. Each possibility leads to another uncertainty. You stop thinking ahead. For now, you need warmth. Not theoretical warmth, real warmth. Enough to protect the children. Enough to dry clothing. Enough to keep the sick traveller from shivering beneath every blanket you possess. Somewhere outside, someone adds wood to a fire. You smell smoke through the canvas. The faint scent gives you an idea. A dangerous idea if handled badly. A necessary one if handled carefully. You look around the cramped wagon at canvas, blankets, wooden boxes, sleeping children, and one feverish patient. Everything here can burn, and somehow, before this night is over, you need to bring fire closer. Fire sounds comforting until you remember what surrounds you. Canvas, dry wood, blankets, clothing, rope, boxes, grease. Human beings packed together so tightly that turning around requires planning permission. Bringing an open flame into this arrangement would be less like creating a cozy fireplace and more like conducting an experiment in regrettable decision-making. So you do not simply strike a match inside the wagon. You climb outside again. The cold greets you immediately. Snow continues falling, though the wind no longer drives it quite as violently as before. The storm has settled into a steady persistence, as if it has nowhere else to be. You pull your coat tighter and look toward the nearest protected fire. It is barely a fire at all. A shallow pit has been scraped through the snow. Someone has arranged a crude windbreak beside it using whatever materials were available. The flames remain low, orange light flickering beneath a blackened cooking vessel. Several people crouch around it. Nobody's warm. They're merely less cold. You join them. The first problem is fuel. On ordinary evenings, children and adults gather wood, brush, dried plants, or other combustible material before darkness. On treeless stretches of the plains, emigrants often burn dried buffalo dung, commonly called buffalo chips, because timber could be scarce. There is your glamorous Western adventure. 2,000 miles toward a new future, and civilization occasionally depends on collecting dried manure. Tonight you would welcome an entire mountain of it. Unfortunately, the snow has covered much of what might have been gathered from the ground. The company has some stored fuel. Not much. Nobody expected to spend an indefinite period stationary in a storm. A few pieces of wood are brought forward. Someone produces broken packing material. Another person suggests sacrificing a damaged crate. That receives immediate approval. The crate has reached the final stage of frontier usefulness. It once held supplies. Now it will become heat. You help break it apart. The wood is dry inside, protected from the rain that soaked nearly everything else. Small pieces catch first, then larger fragments begin burning. The flame rises. For several seconds, everyone simply watches it. Fire has always been hypnotic. Tonight it feels almost sacred. You warm your hands. Pain comes before comfort. Your fingers tingle sharply as sensation returns. You hold them farther from the flame. Too much heat too quickly is unpleasant. The others do the same. Nobody speaks much. There's a shared understanding that this fuel cannot be wasted. Fire on overland journeys served many purposes beyond warmth. It cooked food, heated water, dried damp items when conditions allowed, provided light, and offered a psychological centre to camp life. Yet maintaining one could become difficult in heavy rain, wind, snow, or landscapes where suitable fuel was scarce. You begin discussing the wagon, not fire inside, absolutely not. Instead, you need to use heat more carefully. Warm water can be carried inside. Heated stones might hold warmth if suitable stones can be found and handled safely. Damp clothing can spend short periods near the outdoor fire. The wagon itself can be made less drafty. Small improvements. That is survival tonight. Not one magnificent solution. 20 small ones. You take a metal container and warm more water. Beside you, another traveller attempts to dry a pair of socks. They steam faintly. The smell is memorable. You decide history books have been unnecessarily quiet about this aspect of westward expansion. A strange domestic trick sometimes used in cold conditions involved warming objects near a hearth and wrapping them before placing them into beds. Heated bricks, stones, warming pans, and bottles of warm water served versions of the same purpose in different households and periods. You do not possess a fashionable bed warmer. You possess a cooking pot and determination. Close enough. When the water is warm, you carry it back. Inside the wagon, the change is subtle but welcome. The sick traveller drinks first. The children receive small amounts. You keep the remaining warm container wrapped securely where it can provide a little heat without spilling. A child presses cold fingers toward it. Warm? Yes. This is apparently the most exciting development of the night. You begin blocking drafts. A folded cloth goes into one gap. A spare sack covers another. You adjust the canvas where wind has been slipping beneath it. The improvement is noticeable. Still cold, but less movement in the air. The difference between miserable and slightly less miserable has become surprisingly important. One child asks why you cannot light a candle. You explain that a small lantern can be used carefully for short periods, but open flames inside the wagon are dangerous. The child looks at the canvas, then at the blankets, then at you. Oh, a successful safety lecture. You return outside with several damp garments. The little communal fire has become the centre of activity. People rotate through it. Nobody remains longer than necessary. Hands warm, water heats, clothing dries imperfectly, fuel shrinks. You watch the wood disappear into glowing coals and feel uncomfortable. Every minute of warmth consumes something you cannot replace easily. Researchers of migration continued to discuss how much emergency preparation varied between wagon companies and individual households. Some travellers carried substantial spare equipment and fuel when circumstances allowed, while others reduced weight aggressively, leaving fewer reserves when weather caused unexpected delays. You understand the argument physically. Carry too much and the animals suffer. Carry too little and you suffer. The trail charges you either way. A gust sends sparks sideways. Everyone moves immediately. Snow is packed around the fire's edge. Someone checks that nothing combustible lies downwind. A prairie fire is unlikely in this snow, but sparks near wagons remain dangerous. You think again about how tempting it would be to place even a tiny flame inside your shelter. Then you imagine canvas catching. The thought ends the temptation. Instead, you return with clothing that is warmer but still damp. The children are asleep again, mostly. One opens an eye when you enter. Is the fire coming in? No. Disappointment. The warm water is. Approval. You settle the container carefully near their feet. The sick traveller seems calmer. The fever has not vanished, but the shivering has eased. You sit beside them. Your own coat smells of smoke now. It is wonderful. Smoke means fire. Fire means someone outside is awake and working. It means warm water can still be made. It means the company has not surrendered to the cold. Beyond the canvas, you hear another piece of wood crack. The sound is followed by voices. Low, practical. Someone mentions rationing fuel. Someone else says there may be brush near the shallow creek if daylight returns clear enough to search. Tomorrow again. Everything depends on tomorrow. You look toward the food sacks, then toward the nearly empty water container. Warmth has occupied your thoughts for hours, but cold is not the only appetite inside this wagon. The children will wake hungry. The sick traveller needs fluids. Everyone needs calories. And outside, snow is slowly sealing away the ordinary sources of water and fuel. You pull the blanket around your shoulders. For the first time tonight, you realize that the storm is not merely something you must endure. If it lasts long enough, you must begin calculating what endurance costs. Hunger announces itself before morning. It begins as a hollow feeling beneath your ribs, easy enough to ignore while you're occupied with blankets, fever, wind, and the delicate business of keeping everyone from freezing. Then your stomach makes a sound. A child opens one eye. Was that you? You consider blaming the oxen. Unfortunately, the oxen are outside. Yes, the child smiles beneath the blanket. Apparently your digestive system has provided the first entertainment of the day. There is still very little daylight, but darkness has softened into grey. The canvas overhead slowly becomes visible, sagging slightly where snow has collected. You reach upward and press gently. The canvas moves. Snow slides from the outside with a soft rushing sound. Everyone looks up. You do it again. Another sheet slips away. The children approve. Congratulations. You have invented frontier television. Then one of them says the inevitable word. Breakfast? You look toward the food stores. Breakfast exists. The difficulty is persuading it to become edible. You have flour, bacon, coffee, beans, perhaps some dried fruit, maybe cornmeal. Supplies differ between households, but emigrants heading west commonly carry food selected because they survive long journeys reasonably well. Flour is particularly important. Bacon provides fat and calories. Beans keep well. Coffee is treasured far beyond its nutritional importance, because human beings remain human beings even while crossing a continent. The problem is that food stored in cold conditions changes character. The bacon is stiff. A container of water has partially frozen. Anything damp is becoming solid around the edges. You inspect the flour carefully, still dry. That is a relief. Wet flour can spoil, clump, or become nearly useless. Protecting provisions from rain and river water matters constantly on the trail. Snow, however, has created a new inconvenience. You need water to cook. There is snow everywhere. This should be simple. It is not. You take a pot outside. The storm continues, but visibility has improved enough to see several nearby wagons. Snow lies in deep uneven drifts around the camp. You scoop clean snow into the pot. It looks impressively full. Then you carry it toward the fire. The little flame survived the night through careful tending and an almost absurd amount of attention. Someone has already added fuel. You place the pot near the heat. The snow collapses. A full pot becomes a shallow puddle. You add more, it collapses again. More snow. More disappointment. There is a quiet absurdity to living in a world made almost entirely of frozen water, while worrying about having enough water. Melting snow for drinking or cooking also consumes fuel, and that matters when wood is scarce. Experienced travellers generally prefer accessible liquid water when possible, but buried streams, frozen surfaces, dangerous conditions, or severe storms can make reaching it difficult, so you keep feeding snow into the pot. Eventually you have enough. You return to the wagon and begin planning the meal. Planning is a generous word. You're deciding what requires the least fuel. Beans would take too long unless already cooked. Bread or simple biscuits need heat. Bacon can cook relatively quickly and provides precious fat. You choose efficiency. The children would choose cake. Fortunately, frontier democracy has limits. Outside, a skillet warms. Bacon begins to hiss. That sound changes the mood of everyone within hearing distance. The smell follows, rich, salty, smoky. For a few wonderful minutes, the storm loses its importance. People look toward the pan with expressions usually reserved for religious revelations. You save the rendered grease. Of course you do. Fat is valuable. Nothing useful is casually discarded. A small amount can flavour other food or assist cooking later. One surprisingly practical habit among emigrant households is the constant reuse of cooking fats, scraps, containers, cloth, and packaging. Modern convenience encourages throwing things away. On the trail, throwing away something useful means carrying its absence for hundreds of miles. Even crumbs begin looking employable. You prepare a simple flour mixture. Nothing elegant. Certainly nothing a fashionable hotel would serve. But warm food matters. The first rough pieces come from the pan browned unevenly. One child receives a portion and immediately asks for another. Eat that first. It's small. So are you. This logic is accepted reluctantly. The sick traveller manages only a little food. That worries you. You encourage a few bites, then water. The drinking matters more. The fever remains, though perhaps not quite as fierce as during the darkest part of the night. Perhaps you hesitate to trust your own judgment. Hope has a way of improving measurements. Still, the patient is awake and responsive. You take that victory. Coffee is prepared for the adults. The smell is almost ridiculously comforting. Coffee was a familiar item in many emigrant provision lists, and some travellers treated it as close to essential. It offered warmth, routine, and stimulation after exhausting days. You cradle the cup between both hands. The heat reaches your fingers. You sip. It is not excellent coffee. It is barely polite coffee. It may contain grounds. It has probably been boiled with enthusiasm rather than precision. You adore it. Academic discussion remains open over exactly how consistently recommended provision lists matched what emigrant families actually consumed on particular journeys. Guidebooks might suggest quantities, but appetite, spoilage, trade, hunting, delays, personal preference, and simple mistakes could transform the diet as the months passed. Your own provisions have already evolved from carefully measured supplies into a collection of questions. How much flour remains? How much bacon? How many days might you be stuck? How much fuel will cooking require? How much can the children eat without being frightened by obvious rationing? That last question stays in your mind. Children notice when portions shrink. You do not want breakfast to feel like an emergency, so you distribute food calmly. Everyone receives enough for now. Not abundance, enough. You eat slowly. The storm makes ordinary chewing feel strangely serious. Outside, someone checks the nearest water source. They return with poor news. The route toward it is difficult. Snow has drifted deeply in the low ground, and visibility beyond camp remains uncertain. For the moment, melting snow is safer. That means more fuel. Again, one problem reaches into another. Water requires fire, fire requires wood, food requires water. The sick require all three. You glance toward the remaining fuel. Nobody needs to say anything. The pile is smaller. A child scrapes the final bacon grease from a plate with a piece of bread. You almost object. Then you decide this is excellent efficiency. The plate comes back impressively clean. Do I have to wash it? Nice attempt. Yes. The child sighs. Even stranded in a blizzard, chores survive. You use the smallest possible amount of warmed water for cleaning. Nothing is wasted. Outside, snow continues drifting against the wagon wheels. Inside, the smell of breakfast lingers. The children look less frightened with food in them. The sick traveller rests again. For perhaps half an hour, the situation feels manageable. Then a shout comes from outside. Not panic. A name. Then another. You pull open the canvas. Several people are standing near the place where animals were secured. One rope hangs loose. Another trails through the snow. You look toward the shapes of the oxen. Count them, then count again. Somewhere during the storm, animals have moved away from camp, and suddenly the food in your stomach feels much less comforting. You count the animals a third time. The number does not improve. Several oxen remain close to the wagons, dark shapes against the snow, their backs whitened and their breath rising in pale clouds. But 2 animals are missing. Possibly 3. Nobody is entirely certain because the storm forced the livestock into an awkward cluster during the night, and darkness made careful counting difficult. Now one thing is obvious. A rope lies half buried in the snow. Its end is loose. You pick it up. The fibres feel stiff beneath your fingers. Whether the fastening failed, an animal pulled free, or someone made a mistake during the confusion is irrelevant for the moment. The oxen are gone. You stare into the white distance. There is no sign of them. This matters more than losing livestock ordinarily would. An ox is not simply an animal travelling with you. It is an engine. A very slow engine with horns, opinions, and an impressive appetite. But an engine nonetheless. Without enough draft animals, your wagon may not move. And if the wagon cannot move, your family cannot simply place several £100 of flour, tools, bedding, clothing, cooking equipment, medicine, and children into convenient suitcases and stroll to Oregon. The animals are part of the survival system. During the Great Overland Migrations, oxen became the preferred draft animals for many families because they combined strength with endurance and could often live on prairie forage. Horses and mules were faster, but they could be more expensive and sometimes required better feed. Oxen had another useful quality. They were usually less inclined toward drama. Usually. Apparently yours have chosen today to explore independent careers. Several adults prepare to search. Nobody goes alone. That decision requires no debate. Visibility has improved since last night, but the storm has not ended. Snow still falls steadily, and wind moves loose powder across the surface in twisting streams. You wrap cloth around your neck and pull your coat tight. Someone suggests that you remain with the sick traveller and children. You hesitate. Then another person volunteers to stay near your wagon. You decide to join the search. The missing animals are too important. You step away from camp. Almost immediately the wagons look smaller. 20 yards, 30, 50. You turn back repeatedly. Canvas tops remain visible above the drifts. Good. You continue. The searchers spread slightly but remain within shouting distance. You look for tracks. At first there are too many. Hoofprints cover the area around camp. Some belong to animals still present. Others disappear beneath drifting snow. You kneel beside one set. Fresh. Perhaps. You're suddenly expected to become an expert tracker despite having spent most of your life considering hoofprints something animals leave behind. Someone nearby has more experience. They examine the marks and point toward a shallow depression. You follow. Snow enters your boots. Your toes are already cold. The wind pushes against your shoulder. You look back again. The wagons are barely visible. That is enough. You keep going. There is an old bit of livestock wisdom suggesting that cattle in severe weather may turn away from the wind and drift with it, sometimes travelling farther than anyone expects. Herd behaviour varies with terrain and conditions, but the idea is useful enough to guide your attention. You check the direction of the storm, then the tracks. They seem to agree. For once, folklore and footprints are cooperating. You move onward. A dark shape appears ahead. Everyone stops. The shape moves. An ox. Relief comes so quickly that you laugh. The animal stands near a patch of brush partly sheltered by the land. Snow covers its back and horns. It looks at you. There is no apology. Naturally, you approach slowly. The ox allows you to take hold. One recovered. You lead it back toward camp while two others continue searching. The return feels longer. Pulling an animal through deep snow requires patience, and the ox has developed a strong preference for remaining exactly where you found it. You encourage, you pull, you speak kindly, then less kindly. The ox responds to none of your emotional range. Eventually it moves. When the wagons emerge clearly through the snow, you feel an unexpected wave of relief. The camp looks miserable. It also looks beautiful. People, shelter, smoke, familiar shapes. You understand how quickly a few hundred yards of bad weather can change the meaning of home. The recovered ox is secured carefully. This time every knot receives suspicious attention. Another search party returns. They found tracks but no animal. One ox remains missing, possibly two. The count is corrected again. Only one. Good news technically. Nobody feels especially cheerful. Specialists studying overland migration still disagree about the precise scale of livestock losses across different routes and seasons, because surviving records are incomplete, and travellers did not always document animals consistently. What is clear is that exhausted, injured, stolen, strayed, or dead draft animals could create severe practical problems for emigrant families. You look at your wagon. It seems heavier now. Every sack inside suddenly has a number attached to it. If an ox is lost permanently, perhaps loads will need to be redistributed. Perhaps supplies will be abandoned. Perhaps another family can lend an animal temporarily. Perhaps the company will remain here longer. Each possibility creates another calculation. Then someone points toward the east. A dark speck moves against the snow. Everyone watches. The speck becomes larger. 4 legs, horns. Your missing ox is walking slowly toward camp as though returning from a perfectly reasonable morning appointment. A child cheers from inside the wagon. You feel like cheering too. The animal approaches the others and stops. No explanations, no visible shame. You secure it with particular care. Then you inspect the rest. Cold weather is hard on livestock. They need protection where possible, but they also need food and water. Snow has buried much of the grass. Some animals paw at the surface, others nose through loose snow. You begin clearing patches where grass may be reached. People gather whatever forage can be found. The animals eat, not enough, but something. Water becomes another concern. You cannot spend all your fuel melting snow for livestock. A sheltered route toward the creek must eventually be found. Someone proposes scouting it later if visibility improves. For now, the animals remain close. You return to the wagon. The children want the entire story. You explain that the oxen wandered away. One child asks whether they were scared. Probably. Did you tell them not to do it again? Yes. Will they listen? You glance through the opening toward the recovered animal. No. This answer seems satisfactory. You settle beside the sick traveller. The fever remains. Outside, ropes creak as the oxen shift. Every few minutes you look out and count. 1, 2, 3. All there. The habit becomes automatic. The storm has taught you something uncomfortable. Your survival does not end at the edge of the wagon. It extends through ropes and harnesses into every animal standing outside. If they weaken, you stop. If they disappear, your future disappears with them. You pull the canvas closed again. Evening approaches. The wind begins rising. And while the daylight fades, you realize that you're about to spend another night listening for sounds you cannot afford to lose. Darkness arrives before you feel ready for it. There is no dramatic sunset, no golden light spreading across the snow. The grey simply deepens until the wagons outside become shapes, then shadows, then almost nothing. You pull the canvas closed. Immediately your world shrinks again. The children arrange themselves beneath blankets with the resignation of people who have discovered that tonight's accommodation is exactly the same as last night's. One asks whether the storm is nearly finished. You listen. Wind presses against the wagon. Snow scratches softly across the canvas. A rope outside knocks against wood. No, there is little point pretending. The child sighs and disappears beneath a blanket. The sick traveller shifts nearby. The cough is still present, but there are longer spaces between spells now. You take comfort in that. Perhaps the fever has eased slightly too. You cannot be certain. Your palm is not a thermometer, and exhaustion is beginning to make every judgment feel unreliable. You offer water. A few swallows are taken. Good. You settle back. For a while, nothing happens. That sounds pleasant. It is not. During daylight, you can see problems. At night, you can only hear possibilities. A creak outside might be an ox moving. A sudden thump might be snow falling from the wagon cover. A scraping noise might be a branch or loose rope. Or something important might be breaking. The imagination is extremely productive when given darkness and insufficient information. Another thump comes from beneath the wagon. You freeze. The children freeze. Everyone listens. Nothing. Then a scratching sound. One child whispers, "What is that?" You consider several answers. Most are unhelpful. Probably snow. Probably is doing impressive work tonight. The sound stops. You breathe again. A basic reality of wagon travel is that the vehicles require constant maintenance. Wooden wheels shrink or swell according to moisture. Iron tires loosen. Axles need lubrication. Spokes crack. Canvas tears. And countless small fittings can fail after months of rough roads. You know your wagon's ordinary noises now. That knowledge is useful. The long groan when weight shifts is familiar. The little click near the rear corner is familiar. The squeak from one wheel has annoyed you for weeks, but storms introduce new sounds. That is the problem. A gust strikes. The canvas bows inward. One child reaches for your arm. The wagon rocks, then settles. "Still here," you say. This earns a small laugh. You repeat it after the next gust. "Still here." Soon it becomes a game. Wind, rock, pause. "Still here." The children whisper it with you. There is something reassuring about naming the obvious. The wagon remains upright. The ropes hold. The animals remain nearby. The fire outside has not gone out. The patient continues breathing. You collect these facts like coins. Another hour passes. Perhaps. Time is difficult to measure. Someone outside calls. You open the canvas slightly. A traveller is making another round through camp, checking wagons and animals. All secure. You answer that your family's managing. The opening closes. Warmth escapes with astonishing speed. You tuck cloth back around the gap. A lantern burns low for several minutes. Its light paints the interior in soft amber. Faces appear from blankets. Boxes cast long shadows. The canvas above seems almost golden. One child holds the battered doll. Another stares at the flame. You extinguish the lantern as soon as you no longer need it. Fuel and fire risk both argue against leaving it burning. Darkness returns. An odd detail found in many 19th century diaries is how often travellers record sounds at night. Wolves, livestock, wind, thunder, river water, wagon movement, crying children, and human voices become more noticeable once vision disappears. You understand why. Your ears are now responsible for half the camp. Far away, something howls. A child sits upright. Wolf! Possibly. You say it is probably a coyote or wolf somewhere beyond camp. The distinction does not improve the child's expression. You explain that the animals are close and people are awake outside. This helps. The howl comes again. Then another answers from farther away. It is eerie rather than immediately threatening. Still, nobody inside your wagon requests a closer investigation. You remain where you are. A larger concern arrives quietly. The sick traveller begins shivering again. You lean closer. The forehead feels warm, but not as fiercely hot as before. Perhaps the fever is changing. You adjust the blankets. The patient whispers something you cannot hear. You ask again. Home. One word. You know what it means. Not the wagon. The old home. The place behind you. You describe it softly. The kitchen. The familiar bed. The sound of a door closing. You do not say whether you will ever see it again. You simply let memory fill the wagon for a while. Experts continue to debate how emigrants emotionally balanced homesickness against hopes for Western opportunity, because letters and diaries often contain both at once. A traveller can be excited about the destination and deeply grieve what has been left behind. Tonight, there is room for both feelings. You want Oregon. You also want a roof. Humans are complicated. Another gust arrives. Snow slides heavily from the canvas. The sound resembles something collapsing. Everyone jumps. Then silence. You almost laugh from relief. The children do. Quiet laughter spreads through the wagon. Apparently terror becomes comedy remarkably quickly when nothing actually breaks. Later, the youngest child falls asleep against you. Their head rests heavily on your arm. Your shoulder begins to ache. You refuse to move. The sick traveller sleeps too. You listen. Outside, the wind rises and falls. At some point you hear an ox pull against its rope. You open the canvas and look. A lantern glows near the animals. Someone is already there checking them. Good. You close the flap. Still here? A sleepy voice whispers beside you. Yes. Still here. Hours crawl past. Your thoughts become less orderly. You imagine morning, clear sky, steam rising from coffee, oxen standing patiently, the trail visible again. Then another blast of wind shakes the wagon and reminds you that morning has made no promises. Near what you guess must be dawn, the storm finally changes, not stops, changes. The wind becomes less constant. There are longer quiet spaces between gusts. You notice because the silence feels strange. Then a faint grey light appears through the canvas. Morning. You carefully move the sleeping child from your shoulder. Your arm tingles painfully. You reach for the flap. The canvas resists. Something presses against it from outside. Snow. You push harder. A narrow opening appears. Cold white light pours into the wagon. You look out. For several seconds you say nothing. The landscape you knew yesterday is gone. Wheels have disappeared beneath drifts. Supplies are buried. Paths have vanished. Wagons sit like small islands in a white sea. And somewhere beneath all that snow is the road you're supposed to follow west. You push against the canvas again. Snow falls inward. A child makes a small offended sound as powder lands across the blanket. Sorry. You clear the opening with both hands and climb outside. Your boots disappear almost immediately. The cold is sharp, but the wind has weakened enough that you can finally lift your face without being struck by driven snow. For the first time since yesterday, you can see beyond the nearest wagons. The view is extraordinary and terrible. The prairie has been erased. Every familiar patch of grass is gone beneath white. The shallow depression where you stopped now holds enormous drifts. Wagons stand at awkward angles, some surrounded almost to their beds. Canvas covers sag beneath accumulated snow. Ropes emerge from drifts and disappear again. Cooking equipment has vanished. A barrel lies on its side with only one curved edge visible. Someone's boot is sticking from the snow. You stare. Then the boot moves. A traveller sits up beside a wagon and begins digging. Good. Not a historical tragedy. Just a man who chose an unfortunate place to sleep. People emerge gradually. Canvas flaps open, heads appear, voices carry through the still air. Everyone all right? Here. Check the animals. Has anyone seen the axe? The camp wakes not with breakfast but with inventory. People, animals, wagons, supplies, tools. You begin counting again. The oxen are present, all of them. You experience more relief than you would have thought possible at the sight of several large animals chewing unhappily beside a drift. The children climb from the wagon one at a time. You make them remain close. They stare across the transformed landscape. One says, "It's pretty." You cannot disagree. Sunlight is beginning to filter through thinning cloud, turning the snow pale blue and silver. Beauty has remarkably poor timing. The sick traveller remains inside. You check before beginning work. The fever seems lower, not gone, but lower. The patient drinks. The cough remains rough. Rest is still essential. That means everyone else works around them. Your first task is clearing the wagon. Snow must be removed from the canvas before its weight causes damage. You push upward from inside while another person brushes from outside. Large sections slide down. Whoomp. The children enjoy this far more than necessary. Soon they're asking to help. You give them smaller jobs. Brush snow from accessible equipment. Clear the entrance. Find anything visible that belongs to your household. Do not wander. The final instruction receives special emphasis. Severe weather could immobilize wagon companies for days, and the work after a storm could be considerable. Snow needed clearing, animals needed attention, damaged gear required repair, and routes had to be found again before travel could resume. The storm may be over, the labour is not. You begin digging around the wheels. The snow is deeper on one side, some is packed firmly overnight. A shovel helps. Where there is no room for a shovel, hands become tools. Soon your back aches. You straighten. Immediately the cold finds the sweat beneath your clothing. You learn the unpleasant equation of winter labour. Work hard enough to stay warm, not so hard that you become soaked. Simple advice. Much harder while excavating a wagon. Nearby, someone discovers a cooking pot under the snow. They raise it triumphantly. A cheer follows. Civilization has recovered cookware. A lesser-known reality of overland travel is how often ordinary equipment becomes precious, simply because replacement is difficult. A lost bucket is not merely inconvenient. A broken axe handle is not merely annoying. Tools support water collection, repairs, cooking, shelter, and animal care. You look around for your own missing items. A wooden spoon appears beside the wheel. You pick it up, the same spoon that nobody could find before the storm. Of course. Apparently the blizzard has been organising your household. One child claims they knew it was there. You decline to investigate this statement. A shout comes from farther across camp. This time everyone turns quickly. A wagon has suffered damage. You walk over. One section of canvas has torn near its fastening. probably strained by wind and accumulated snow. The tear is not catastrophic. It is still serious. Needles appear, heavy thread, spare cloth, several people begin helping. Another wagon has a loosened wheel component. Someone else reports a damaged harness strap. No single problem is enormous. Together they form an exhausting list. Researchers still debate the degree to which popular images of wagon trains exaggerate constant mechanical disaster. Many vehicles were sturdy and carefully maintained, but diaries unquestionably show repairs as a regular feature of overland travel. Your wagon has survived. You pat the wooden side almost affectionately. Then you remember how often it squeaks and withdraws some of the affection. The animals need water. A small group begins scouting toward the creek. The sky is clearer now. You can see farther. Low ground is visible beyond camp, though snow hides the exact channel. Long poles are carried to test uncertain surfaces. Nobody wants to step through concealed ice or into deep water. You remain behind. There is enough work here. Fuel must be uncovered, food prepared, blankets aired where possible. The children need warm movement without becoming wet. The patient needs checking. You move constantly between tasks. At some point, someone hands you coffee. You do not remember asking. You accept it anyway. The cup warms your hands, the coffee tastes smoky, possibly because everything tastes smoky now. You drink slowly while looking across camp. People are tired. Faces are pale. Clothing is stained. Nobody resembles the heroic emigrants who will eventually appear in romantic paintings. This looks more like a group of exhausted families who desperately need laundry. That is probably closer to history. The creek party returns with good news. Water can be reached. A path must be cleared, but the source is usable. This saves fuel. Immediately, several people organize containers. The animals will be watered in manageable groups. You feel the camp's mood lift. Not dramatically, just enough. Then another piece of information travels between the wagons. One family has lost part of its food supply. A container opened during the storm. Some contents are wet. Another household is nearly out of dry fuel. A third has a child who developed a fever overnight. Your own difficulties suddenly look less private. You glance toward your wagon. Inside is flour. Not endless flour, but some. You have blankets. Not enough to feel generous, but perhaps enough to share one. The firewood pile is small. Everyone's is small. You begin understanding that the next stage of survival will not depend only on what your family packed months ago. The storm has rearranged more than the landscape. It has rearranged ownership. Who has food? Who has medicine? Who has dry fuel? Who has strength? Who has knowledge? Those questions now belong to the whole camp. The sun rises higher. Snow begins sliding from another canvas roof. Children laugh at the sound. Someone calls for help carrying water. You set down the empty coffee cup. Your back hurts. Your hands are raw. You have slept almost nothing. And yet you walk toward the voice. Because somewhere between yesterday and this morning, the wagon company has stopped being a collection of families travelling in the same direction. For now, it has become a village. The village has no streets. It has paths, narrow ones, cut through the snow between wagons by repeated boots. By midday, these little corridors connect families who yesterday might have exchanged little more than greetings while walking beside their teams. Now people move constantly between them. A pot travels one direction, a blanket travels another. Someone carries an axe toward a damaged wagon. Someone else returns with water. A child appears holding 3 pieces of firewood, almost as proudly as if carrying treasure. At the centre of everything, a communal fire burns carefully. Not brightly. Nobody can afford brightly, but steadily. You carry a bucket from the creek path toward your wagon. The water sloshes against the sides. Your arms ache. The distance is not great, yet every step through snow requires effort. Halfway back, someone approaches. Need a hand? You begin to say no, then you reconsider. Yes. The bucket changes hands. This is becoming easier, not carrying water, accepting help. Before the storm, independence feels natural. Every household has its own wagon, provisions, equipment, animals, and plans. The arrangement encourages the illusion that each family is crossing the continent by itself. The blizzard has corrected that idea. Your neighbour's axe repairs your wheel. Your flower may feed their child. Someone else's medicine might lower your companion's fever. A stranger may stand outside in freezing darkness checking your oxen while you sleep. Individual preparation matters enormously on the trail, but emigrant companies often relied on cooperation for river crossings, repairs, animal recovery, illness, childbirth, burial, navigation, and emergencies. Nobody can carry every skill west, so skills travel between wagons. You return to your shelter. The sick traveller is awake. The fever seems lower again. You allow yourself to believe this improvement. A woman from another wagon sits nearby. She is offered to remain with the patient while you work. She's mending a torn piece of cloth at the same time. Of course she is. Nobody here appears capable of doing only one useful thing. How's the cough? Still there. The patient demonstrates immediately. Yes, still there. But breathing appears easier. You provide water, then a little warm broth made from shared ingredients. The patient drinks slowly. The woman watches. Good. One word. You treasure it. The children are outside under supervision. They have been recruited to clear loose snow from a path. Calling this work is generous. Half the snow appears to be moving sideways rather than away, but they are occupied. That matters. You step outside again. Near the communal fire, food is being discussed. One family has wet flour. Another has extra beans. Someone possesses more bacon than expected. A household that lost fuel still has coffee. You begin exchanging, not formally. No ledger. No carefully negotiated price. Need moves faster than commerce today. A sack of usable flour is divided. Your family contributes some. You feel the loss immediately. Every cup given away is a cup unavailable later. Then you look at the neighbouring children. The calculation becomes easier. An intriguing feature of trail diaries is how frequently emigrants mention borrowing and lending mundane objects. Needles, tools, cookware, food, animals, clothing and medicine move between households. The grand story is westward migration, but much of daily survival sounds suspiciously like asking the neighbours whether they have a spare bucket. The frontier contains fewer heroic speeches than future generations may prefer. It contains many requests for rope. You're asked for rope now. Naturally, a damaged harness needs temporary repair. You find a length. The owner promises to return it. You wave away the promise. For the moment, you know where the rope is. That already counts as organisational success. Nearby, two experienced travellers work on the harness. One cuts leather, another punches holes, a third holds the pieces steady. The repair is ugly. Nobody cares. If it holds, it is beautiful. A little farther away, several people strengthen the torn wagon cover discovered this morning. A spare piece of canvas is sewn across the damaged area. Snow reflects sunlight upward, making everyone squint. The sky is clearer. For the first time, blue appears between clouds. You almost resent how innocent it looks. Yesterday, the same sky tried to bury you. Today it behaves as though nothing happened. Historical researchers continue to examine how formal leadership actually functioned within emigrant companies. Some groups elected captains and adopted written rules, while others operated through looser agreements. Emergencies could strengthen leadership, undermine it, or shift authority toward whoever possessed the most useful experience at that moment. Your camp demonstrates the last possibility beautifully. The person who knows animals commands attention near the oxen. The person skilled with tools directs repairs. Someone experienced in nursing visits the sick. A traveller familiar with local terrain helps locate water. Nobody needs to announce themselves as supreme commander of everything. Competence is persuasive enough. The children return. One has snow inside a boot. Of course. You remove the boot and sock. The foot is cold but healthy. You rub it gently and replace the damp sock with a dry one. Dry socks have become a luxury item. The child asks whether the wet pair can simply be thrown away. You look at them with genuine astonishment. Throw away wool? On this trail? You might as well throw away gold. The sock is carried toward the fire to dry. By afternoon, the camp smells of smoke, wet leather, cooking beans, damp wool, livestock and coffee. It is not pleasant. It is wonderful. Those smells mean activity. The camp is functioning. Someone even laughs loudly near the fire. The sound carries across the snow. Others join. You do not hear the joke. You laugh anyway. Later, a bowl arrives from another family. Stew. Thin, but hot. You didn't request it. Apparently your contribution of flour has returned in another form. You carry the bowl inside. The children gather immediately. Everyone receives some. The sick traveller takes a few spoonfuls. You eat last. The stew tastes mostly of beans and smoke, possibly a little bacon, possibly several things you cannot identify. It is excellent. One child asks who made it. You name the family. We should give them something. You look at the child. There it is. The lesson without a lecture. Yes. What? You consider your remaining supplies. Tomorrow's problem. For now, you send back the clean bowl with a small portion of coffee. The exchange continues. Food becomes fuel. Fuel becomes warm water. Warm water becomes nursing. A repaired harness becomes tomorrow's transportation. Nothing stays isolated. Evening approaches beneath a clearing sky. The temperature will fall sharply after sunset. Everyone knows it. Blankets are redistributed. The weakest receive more. People volunteer for animal watches. You're assigned a later turn. For once that sounds comforting. It means you can sleep first. You settle inside the wagon. The children curl together. The patient rests beneath shared blankets. Outside, footsteps move along the little paths between wagons. You hear voices. Low. Familiar now. Someone adds wood to the communal fire, someone checks a rope, someone coughs in another wagon. You realise that you know where the elderly traveller sleeps, where the family with the feverish child is camped. Who owns the strongest axe? Who makes decent coffee? Who can repair leather? 2 days ago, some of these people were simply shapes walking beside distant wagons. Tonight, their survival has become part of yours, and yours has become part of theirs. Your turn at the animal watch comes sometime deep in the night. Someone touches the wagon canvas and calls your name softly. You wake with no idea where you are. For one confused second you expect a bedroom ceiling. Instead, your face is inches from canvas. Your shoulder is numb beneath a sleeping child's head, and somebody nearby is breathing through a congested nose with astonishing determination. Oregon Trail. Blizzard. Right. You carefully extract yourself from the blankets. The cold outside feels almost clean after the crowded wagon. The sky has cleared. Stars shine above the snow. Without clouds, the temperature has fallen sharply, and every breath forms a pale cloud. You walk toward the animals. The snow creaks beneath your boots. That sound tells you how cold the surface has become. Several oxen stand close together. Their dark bodies are almost motionless. You check ropes. Secure. You check again. The memory of yesterday's missing animals has apparently turned you into someone who distrusts knots professionally. A traveller beside you rubs both hands together. My fingers don't feel right. You look. The fingertips appear pale. That gets your attention. You guide the person toward the fire. Cold injuries are not something to ignore. Frostbite occurs when tissue freezes after prolonged exposure to sufficiently low temperatures. Fingers, toes, ears, and noses are particularly vulnerable because they are exposed or far from the body's warmer core. People in 1850 may not describe the injury using exactly the same modern categories you know today, but they understand that severe cold can damage flesh. The important thing is warmth. Careful warmth. You bring the traveller near shelter and begin gradual warming. You do not rub snow onto the fingers, despite an old belief that doing so can help. That remedy has circulated in various cold climates, and is precisely the kind of advice that sounds traditional enough to be convincing, while making modern physicians wince. Rubbing frozen tissue can cause additional damage. Tonight, fortunately, the fingers begin regaining sensation. Pain arrives. The traveller grimaces. Pain is unpleasant. Pain is also reassuring. You remain until the colour improves. Then you return to the animals. The incident makes you notice your own toes. Cold. You wiggle them. They respond. Excellent. You keep moving. The watch passes quietly. When another person relieves you, you hurry back toward the wagon. Inside, the air feels almost warm by comparison. Almost. You check the sick traveller before lying down. The fever is lower, definitely lower now. But the cough sounds deeper. Morning brings another consultation. Several people gather around the wagon opening while the patient sits supported by blankets. Everyone has advice. This is comforting until you realise how completely the advice disagrees. One person recommends willow bark tea, another suggests a mustard preparation, someone mentions spirits. Another traveller has heard that onions placed near the chest are helpful. A third believes the patient needs stronger medicine from a bottle carried by another family. You listen. The patient looks exhausted merely hearing the options. 19th century domestic medicine combines practical nursing with herbal traditions, patent remedies, professional treatments, family recipes, and beliefs inherited across generations. Some substances contain genuinely useful compounds. Others provide comfort without treating the underlying illness. Some treatments can be harmful. Medicine is changing rapidly during this period, but germ theory has not yet become the foundation of ordinary practice. You are living in the uncomfortable space between experience and understanding. You know water matters, rest matters, warmth matters, cleanliness matters, even if the precise biological reasons are not yet understood. So you begin there. The patient receives warm liquid. Bedding is adjusted. A damp cloth is replaced. The wagon is aired briefly when the sun rises enough to make that tolerable. One visitor offers willow bark. You know people have used it for pain and fever for centuries. You accept a modest preparation. Another offers a mysterious dark bottle with an elaborate label. You decline. The bottle looks offended. Patent medicines in the 19th century often advertise themselves with extraordinary confidence. A single preparation may claim to treat an impressive collection of unrelated complaints. There is something almost admirable about the ambition. Cough, fever, indigestion, melancholy, possibly dissatisfaction with your neighbour. One bottle apparently has you covered. You remain sceptical. Outside, another problem appears. One of the children has painfully cold toes after spending too long near the snow. You remove the boots immediately. The socks are damp. Again, you stare at them. How? The child shrugs. Children possess mysterious methods for introducing water into footwear. The feet are pale and chilled, but not frozen. You warm them gradually and replace the socks. Then you deliver a speech about keeping feet dry. The child listens with the expression of someone attending a very long sermon. 10 minutes later, they ask to go outside again. You say no. A debate follows. You win because you control the boots. Historical scholars continue to debate how effective the average emigrant family's medical preparations actually were. partly because surviving diaries often describe symptoms and treatments without enough information for firm modern diagnoses. A person recorded as having fever might have suffered from any number of illnesses, and recovery after a remedy does not necessarily prove the remedy caused recovery. Your own patient improves slowly, whether because of rest, water, warmth, willow bark, luck, or some combination, you cannot say. By afternoon, the fever has dropped further. The patient asks for food. That is the best sentence you have heard in days. You provide broth first, then a little bread. More. You smile, slowly. For once, someone else is complaining about portion size. The children gather nearby. The battered doll is returned to its owner with solemn thanks. The child examines it carefully. Apparently, the doll has survived its medical career without injury. Outside, the camp continues repairing itself. Inside, you finally allow your shoulders to relax. Not completely. The cough remains. Weakness remains. The patient cannot walk beside the wagon yet. If travel resumes soon, space must be made for them to ride. That means wait. Wait means decisions. But those belong to tomorrow. For now, the patient eats. The children are warm. Your own fingers and toes still answer when requested. You sit beside the wagon opening and let sunlight touch your face. Snow sparkles beyond the camp. It looks soft, harmless. You know better now. Cold rarely announces exactly when discomfort becomes danger. A numb finger, a wet sock, a cough that deepens overnight. Small things cross invisible boundaries. Your task is to notice before they do. The patient finishes the broth and hands back the bowl. Then, for the first time since the storm began, asks a question that has nothing to do with illness. When are we leaving? You look toward the buried trail. Across camp, other people are asking exactly the same thing, and not everyone agrees on the answer. The question moves through camp faster than breakfast. When are you leaving? At first it sounds simple. The storm has passed. The sky is clear. The animals are standing. The wagons remain upright. Surely the obvious thing is to continue west. Then you look at the snow. The trail is still buried. Drifts fill the low ground. The creek crossing is difficult. Several animals are tired. One wagon needs more repairs. 2 people remain feverish. Your own patient can sit upright now, but walking 10 miles through snow would be absurd. Leaving is possible. Whether leaving is wise is another matter. By mid-morning, several adults gather near the communal fire. You stand among them. Nobody calls this a council. It becomes one anyway. One traveller wants to remain another day. Let the sun work. Let the animals rest. Allow the sick more time. Clear more of the trail. Reasonable. Another argues that remaining still consumes food and fuel. Also reasonable. A third points toward the sky and says good weather should be used while it exists. Very reasonable. A fourth says nobody knows whether another storm is approaching. Uncomfortably reasonable. You begin to suspect that survival mostly involves choosing between several sensible people who disagree. Organised wagon companies sometimes elected captains or leaders and adopted rules before departure. Yet authority varied greatly. A captain could guide decisions, settle disputes, organise watches, or coordinate difficult crossings, but families still possessed their own property and priorities. This is not an army. Nobody can simply command every household to march, so people talk, and then talk slightly louder. You listen. A man whose wagon lost food during the storm wants movement soon. Every stationary day reduces his supplies. A mother with a sick child wants rest. An experienced teamster worries that forcing exhausted oxen through deep snow could injure them. Someone else suggests sending scouts ahead before deciding. That idea quiets the group. Information. A rare luxury. 2 travellers volunteer, then a third. They will follow what they believe is the trail, examine the creek crossing, look for shallower snow beyond the low ground, and return before afternoon. You watch them prepare. Warm clothing, rope, a little food, long poles. Nobody carries unnecessary weight. One of the scouts jokes that if they find Oregon just over the next hill, they will send word. A few people laugh. The tension loosens. Then the scouts disappear across the white landscape. Now you wait. Waiting sounds restful. It is not. You repair equipment, check food, rearrange the wagon. The sick traveller must ride when movement resumes. That means creating space. You remove one box, heavy. Inside are tools, clothing, and several objects you have not used for weeks. You stare at them. The trail has a way of changing the emotional meaning of possessions. At departure, every object represented preparation. Now some represent weight. You hold a heavy household item that seemed essential months ago. It has not been used once. A nearby traveller looks at it. You carrying that all the way? You dislike the question because you know the answer. Probably not. Emigrants frequently discarded possessions along heavily travelled routes when wagons became overloaded or animals weakened. Accounts describe furniture, tools, clothing, books, trunks, and other belongings left beside the trail. Some items were foolish luxuries. Others were abandoned only because circumstances became desperate. A peculiar story repeated in trail lore describes travellers encountering discarded stoves and furniture that had been carried astonishing distances before their owners finally accepted that mountains do not care about sentimental attachment. You look at your object again. You're not at the mountains yet. The object still loses. You place it in a small pile for possible abandonment. The children notice. Are we leaving that? Yes, but it's ours. That is the problem. You explain weight, oxen, snow, the sick traveller needing space. The child looks at the wagon, then at the patient, then at the object. All right. Another quiet lesson. By noon, the scouts have not returned. People begin watching the horizon. The clear weather that seemed reassuring this morning now creates another worry. Where are they? You eat without appetite. The children ask questions. You answer with increasingly creative versions of soon. Then dark shapes appear in the distance. 3, you count. 3, the camp relaxes. The scouts return tired but unharmed. Everyone gathers. The news is mixed. The trail can be followed. Beyond the creek, snow is shallower on higher ground. But the crossing itself is difficult. Drifts block part of the approach. Moving wagons through it today would take hours. There is also concern about ice near the water. The scouts recommend waiting. Immediately the argument resumes. Not angrily at first, then a little angrily. One family worries about food. Another worries about weather. Someone insists the animals can manage. Someone else says risking a broken leg or damaged wagon would be foolish. Researchers still disagree about how often disagreements within emigrant companies produced genuine division rather than temporary argument. Diaries record quarrels, splinter groups, leadership disputes, and families changing companies, but they also show people repeatedly cooperating after disagreements when necessity demanded it. You can understand both, spending months with the same tired people while hungry, dirty, worried, and sleep-deprived is not an ideal experiment in social harmony. Someone near the fire finally says what everyone needs to hear. We don't all have to agree about everything. We have to agree about today. Silence. Today. Not Oregon. Not the entire winter. Today. The decision forms gradually. Remain one more night. Clear the approach to the creek. Rest the animals. Prepare wagons. Reduce loads. Leave early if weather remains clear. Nobody looks completely satisfied. That probably means compromise has occurred. The afternoon becomes purposeful. People shovel. Harness is inspected. Loads are shifted. Your patient sleeps while you reorganize the wagon around them. You remove another unnecessary item, then another. Each one hurts less. Food stays, blankets stay, tools stay, medicine stays. Sentimental objects receive more complicated negotiations. The battered doll survives immediately. Nobody challenges it. You would rather abandon a chair. By evening the wagon is lighter. The sick traveller has a proper place to lie. The children understand that tomorrow may involve walking again. The oxen receive as much rest and forage as you can provide. You stand beside them as sunset colours the snow. For the first time in days, the western horizon is visible. Clouds remain there, thin ones, nothing obviously threatening. You refuse to trust them. Still, the sight of open sky feels like permission to imagine movement. Behind you, camp settles for what everyone hopes is the final night in this accidental village. Tomorrow you may move, or the weather may decide otherwise. That uncertainty remains. But tonight the choice has been made. You stay, you prepare, and you wait for the morning to tell you whether patience was wisdom or merely another day spent watching supplies disappear. Morning answers with silence. Not the heavy silence of falling snow, not the uneasy pause between gusts. A clear silence. You wake and listen for canvas snapping above you. Nothing. The wagon does not rock. No snow brushes against the cover. Someone outside is already walking through camp, and each footstep crunches sharply in the frozen surface. You open the canvas. The sky is pale blue. For several seconds, you simply look at it. Blue has become an unexpectedly emotional colour. Sunlight touches the tops of the wagons and makes the snow glitter. Smoke rises almost straight from the morning fire. That is what you notice first. Straight smoke, no wind. After days of watching it twist sideways, the thin vertical column looks like a flag announcing peace. You climb down. Cold air fills your lungs. The temperature remains bitter, but without the wind it feels manageable. Around you, the camp is already awake. Nobody wastes the weather. Breakfast begins. Animals are checked. Harness appears. Ropes are coiled. Shovels strike packed snow. The decision made yesterday now becomes action. Before the wagons move, however, people want another look ahead. The storm has transformed the route, and yesterday's scouts examined only the nearest section. A larger group prepares to travel farther. You volunteer. Your patient is stronger this morning. Still coughing, still weak, but able to eat. Another traveller offers to remain nearby. You accept. The children immediately ask to join the scouting party. You say no. They negotiate. You continue saying no. Eventually they discover that negotiations work poorly when one side is already putting on boots and leaving. You set out with several adults. The route toward the creek is easier than yesterday because people spent hours clearing the worst drifts. Snow walls rise beside the narrow path. In places the original trail remains invisible. You follow remembered direction. Wagon marks uncovered beneath the snow and the shallow shape of the land. This is one reason experienced guides and travellers matter. A road can disappear while geography remains. The Oregon Trail was not a single narrow track running unchanged from Missouri to Oregon. It consisted of routes, cut-offs, branches, river valleys, crossings and stretches where wagons spread widely across the landscape. Years of traffic created visible traces, but emigrants still relied heavily on landmarks and knowledge of terrain. Today almost every trace has turned white. You reach the creek. Water moves beneath thin shelves of ice near the edges. The crossing looks unpleasant, but possible. Yesterday snow blocked much of the approach. Now the path is clearer. Several people test the ground with poles. Firm here, softer there. You mark the safest line. Beyond the creek, the land rises gently. You continue. With every step upward, the snow becomes shallower. Wind during the storm appears to have swept the exposed rise and deposited much of its load in lower areas. Grass emerges in places, actual grass. You almost greet it. This is excellent news for the livestock. Someone kneels and brushes snow aside. More grass appears beneath. The animals may find better forage once you reach this ground. You walk farther. From the crest, the world opens. For the first time since the blizzard began, you can see miles. White prairie stretches behind you. The wagon camp sits in the shallow depression like a handful of tiny objects dropped onto a sheet. Ahead, the route continues across rolling country. The sight creates a strange sensation. The storm felt endless while you were inside it. From here, its effects look enormous but finite. There is land beyond the drifts. There is always something comforting about discovering an edge to misery. One unusual observation in emigrant accounts is how rapidly weather can change the emotional description of the same landscape. A prairie praised one day for openness and beauty can become threatening the next because it offers no shelter. Then clear weather returns and the same openness becomes reassuring again. The landscape has not changed its personality. You have. Someone points toward a line of darker vegetation in the distance, possibly better shelter, perhaps more fuel, maybe a creek bend. The group discusses whether the wagon company could reach it before evening. Distances on open plains are deceptive. Something that appears close can require hours. You have learned not to trust horizons. One scout estimates several miles, another thinks farther. A third says the important thing is simply reaching the higher ground first. Sensible. You turn back. On the return journey, you notice evidence of what the storm has done. A broken branch protrudes from snow. Animal tracks cross the white surface. Some are small, others belong to larger wildlife that moved after the weather cleared. You find one place where wind has carved snow into a sharp ridge nearly waist high. A wagon cannot simply roll through that. More digging will be needed. The route is passable, not easy. Passable is enough. Specialists studying the overland migrations continue to debate how emigrants balanced guidebook advice against information gathered directly from fellow travellers and local conditions. Printed guides could offer distances and landmarks, but weather, water availability, trail damage, and seasonal changes often force people to trust immediate observation instead. Today, nobody cares what a guidebook promised months ago. You have seen the creek yourself. You have touched the snow. You know where the grass begins. That knowledge feels more valuable than ink. When camp comes back into view, children run toward the returning scouts. They stop when adults shout at them not to leave the cleared path. One child waves enthusiastically, you wave back. People gather for the report. You explain. Creek passable. Higher ground better. Grass visible. Trail difficult but manageable. The effect is immediate. Shoulders straighten. Conversation changes. Yesterday everyone discussed whether movement was possible. Now they discuss how. Teams will be harnessed early. The strongest wagons will cross first. People will stand near the creek to assist. Loads may be carried separately through the worst section. Families with sick travellers receive help. Nobody says the word rescue. It feels too dramatic. Yet something inside you recognizes that this is what a route out of danger looks like. Not cavalry appearing over a hill. Not miraculous weather. Information, shovels, rope, oxen, neighbours, and a patch of visible grass. You return to your wagon. The sick traveller sits upright. Well, we can go. The smile that follows is weak but unmistakable. The children hear. Immediately they begin discussing Oregon again as though it might appear before lunch. You let them. Outside, sunlight continues softening the upper surface of the snow. Drops fall from the wagon canvas. Tiny sounds. Drip, drip, drip. For days, water falling from the sky meant trouble. Now water falling from the wagon roof sounds like release. You stand in the sunlight and watch the road slowly reappear beneath the work of dozens of hands. Tomorrow, if the sky keeps its promise, the wheels will turn again. The wagon looks reluctant to become a vehicle again. For several days it has been a bedroom, sick room, pantry, shelter, nursery, and occasionally a place where 5 people attempt to put on boots simultaneously. Now you stand beside it with a shovel and remind yourself that somewhere beneath the snow are wheels. Useful things, wheels. You would like to see them again. The morning is clear. Sunlight has not yet reached the bottom of the shallow depression, and the snow there remains firm from the night cold. That is good. Soft snow will become heavier later. So everyone begins early. Shovels bite into the drifts. You clear around the front wheel first, wood gradually appears. Then the iron tyre, then the lower spokes. You move to the next. Children help with smaller tools and pieces of board. Their contribution is inconsistent but enthusiastic. One child spends several minutes clearing snow from a single spoke, with the concentration of an archaeologist discovering an ancient city. Done. You inspect it. One spoke is indeed magnificent. Only 3 wheels remain. Excellent. The child beams. Encouragement is cheaper than hiring labour. All across camp, wagons emerge from the snow. The scene is filled with scraping, chopping, calling, and the occasional cheer when something lost is recovered. A metal cup appears, a length of chain, a mitten. Someone finds a small cooking utensil and claims it belongs to them. Another person claims exactly the same thing. A brief argument follows. Apparently civilization has recovered enough to resume disputes over kitchen equipment. This feels encouraging. Your wagon requires inspection before loading. You crawl beneath it. The wooden axle looks sound, the wheels turn. One fitting needs attention. Grease must be applied. Wagon maintenance was an ordinary part of overland travel. Axles needed lubrication because friction could damage wooden components, and emigrants carried substances such as grease, tar, or other preparations for the job. Neglect a squeaking axle long enough, and the trail may provide a very expensive lesson in mechanics. You apply grease carefully. Your wagon has been complaining for hundreds of miles. Perhaps today it has earned some kindness. Nearby, harness is laid across the snow for inspection. Leather has stiffened in the cold. Straps are flexed gently. Buckles checked. Repairs from yesterday are tested. Nothing receives automatic trust anymore. Rope is checked. Canvas is checked. Yokes are checked. Even the children appear to be checked for loose components. One is missing a mitten. Naturally, the mitten was definitely present 10 minutes ago. A search begins. You look inside the wagon, under blankets, behind a sack, near the wheel. The child insists it must have disappeared during the storm. You point out that they were wearing it after breakfast. This does not alter the theory. Finally, another child produces the mitten from beneath a coat. Mystery solved. The Oregon Trail can continue. The next task is wait. Your patient needs space to ride. That decision is not negotiable. The fever is mostly broken, but weakness remains obvious. A few steps outside leave the traveller tired, so the wagon must become lighter elsewhere. You examine your belongings again. Food stays, water containers stay, blankets stay, essential tools stay, medicine stays, clothing mostly stays. Then come the uncomfortable objects, a heavy box, an unnecessary piece of furniture, extra household items. You hold each one and ask the same question. Does this help you reach Oregon? Yesterday that question felt painful. Today it feels practical. One item is placed beside the abandoned pile, then another. Across camp, other families do the same. This was a recognizable feature of Western migration. As draft animals weakened or terrain became difficult, emigrants sometimes reduced wagon loads by discarding possessions they once considered essential. Trails could become lined with abandoned goods, furniture, books, tools, clothing, even machinery. A mildly absurd piece of trail lore describes newcomers repeatedly carrying heavy cast-iron stoves west despite warnings, only to abandon them after discovering that an ox does not care how expensive your stove was back in Missouri. You look toward your cooking equipment. Thankfully, nothing requires a team of its own. The abandoned objects form a strange little museum. Each has a story. Nobody has time to tell them. By mid-morning, the oxen are brought forward. They look rested compared with 2 days ago, not cheerful. Oxen rarely appear cheerful, but steady. Yokes are fitted, chains connected. The animals lean slightly against the weight. Your wagon shifts. Everyone nearby stops. The wheels move several inches. A child cheers. The wagon stops again. Snow blocks the rear wheel. More digging. Another attempt. This time the wagon rolls free of its resting place. The sound of the wheels is almost shocking. Creak, crunch, creak. You have heard it for months. You missed it. Researchers still disagree about exactly how much emigrants understood the cumulative strain that overloading placed on draft animals before beginning their journeys. Guidebooks frequently warned against excessive baggage, yet diaries and trail debris suggest that many families learned the lesson gradually and painfully. You understand now. Every unnecessary pound becomes work for the animals. Every exhausted animal becomes risk for the family. The mathematics is simple. Emotion is heavier. The wagons assemble near the cleared route. Nobody departs yet. The creek crossing requires organization. Several strong travelers go ahead with ropes and tools. Others remain with the teams. Children are instructed repeatedly to stay close. Your patient lies securely inside the wagon, wrapped in blankets. You provide water. Comfortable? A tired laugh. Compared with what? Fair point. You climb down. The wagon begins moving. Slowly. The wheels enter the path cut through the snow. Oxen lean into their yokes. The entire vehicle gives a deep wooden groan. Then another. Forward. Only a few yards, but forward. The first wagon reaches the creek. People gather around it. The approach is slippery. Ropes are attached. Men and women position themselves where they can assist without standing directly in the path of wheels. The team moves. Water splashes. Ice cracks near the edge. The wagon tilts. Everyone holds their breath. Then it climbs the opposite bank. A cheer rises, one wagon across, then another. Your turn approaches. You walk beside the oxen. The children remain where instructed for once. Perhaps they sense that this is not a moment for negotiation. The team descends. The front wheels enter water. Cold spray strikes your boots. The wagon rocks. You hear something shift inside. Everyone all right? Yes. The oxen pull. For one horrible second, the rear wheels seem stuck. People push. Rope tightens. You push too. Mud beneath the snow grips the wheel, then it releases. The wagon climbs. Up, up, onto firm ground. You stop, breathe, look back. The camp that protected you lies beyond the creek. Smoke still rises from the last fire. Discarded objects remain beside flattened patches where wagons stood. Soon snow and weather will alter the place again. You turn west. Higher ground waits ahead. Grass shows through the white. One by one the wagons gather on the far bank. The company is no longer stranded. Not quite travelling yet, but no longer stranded. And when the final wagon climbs from the creek, someone calls forward. The teams lean into their yokes. The wheels begin turning together. The first mile feels longer than the entire storm, not because the road is especially difficult now. Because every sound from the wagon makes you listen. Creak. Is that normal? Clink. Was that there before? A wheel drops into a shallow rut. You turn immediately, nothing breaks. The oxen continue. You realize the blizzard has changed your relationship with ordinary noises. Before, a creaking wagon was annoying. Now every familiar complaint sounds like evidence that the vehicle is still functioning. The wagon creaks. Good. The harness pulls tight. Good. Hooves press into snow. Good. Behind the canvas, the sixth traveller coughs. Not good exactly. But the cough is weaker. You accept that too. The children walk beside you where the ground permits. After days inside the wagon, they seem delighted merely to possess space. One runs several steps ahead. You call them back. The child returns reluctantly. Apparently being trapped by a blizzard has not permanently improved obedience. Some things survive everything. The wagon company climbs toward the higher ground the scouts found yesterday. Snow becomes shallower. Grass appears more frequently. The oxen notice before you do. Several lower their heads whenever the wagons pause, pulling at exposed tufts. You allow them time. There is no sense escaping the storm only to exhaust the animals immediately afterward. Progress remains slow. That is fine. Slow movement is movement. A practical truth of the overland journey is that emigrants rarely maintained one fixed daily distance. Terrain, weather, river crossings, illness, mechanical trouble, livestock condition, and available grass or water could shorten or lengthen a day's travel dramatically. Today nobody expects 20 miles. 5 good miles would feel like a celebration. You look back. The depression where you camped is already becoming difficult to distinguish. From this distance, nothing about it appears important. A patch of snow, a creek, a few marks where wagons stood. Yet for several days that tiny place contained your entire world. Funny how geography works. A location becomes important because something happened there. Then you leave, and the landscape keeps no diary. By midday the wagons stop on exposed grass. Animals feed. People eat. Children stretch their legs. Your patient sits near the wagon opening with a blanket around the shoulders. Colour has returned to the face. Not much. Enough. You hand over a cup. Better? Yes. The answer comes without hesitation. You believe it. The relief is quiet. There is no dramatic music, no announcement. Someone simply feels better than yesterday. History is full of victories too small for monuments. You sit beside the wagon and eat bread with a little bacon. The meal tastes better than it should. Perhaps hunger improves cooking. Perhaps survival improves appetite. A curious trail custom appears in some emigrant recollections after difficult crossings or frightening episodes. People mark events through names, stories, jokes, or private references that remain within the company. A creek might acquire a nickname. A troublesome hill becomes permanently associated with a broken wagon or runaway animal. One child has already named your accidental campsite. The snow place. You suggest this lacks imagination. The child disagrees. The snow place it is. You continue west. The sun softens the upper layer of snow. Water drips from canvas edges. Wheels cut dark tracks through white ground. For the first time in days, the tracks remain visible behind you. You find that reassuring. The storm erased the road. Now you're making one. Other wagon companies have done the same before you. More will come after. By 1850, the Oregon Trail has already carried thousands of emigrants westward, and migration will continue in large numbers through the decade. Families travel for farmland, economic opportunity, adventure, religious community, or hopes that are difficult to reduce to one motive. The movement also carries profound consequences for indigenous peoples whose homelands these routes cross. Growing settler migration brings increasing pressure on land, resources, political relationships, disease environments, and existing communities. Your family's private dream exists inside a much larger history. You do not see all of it while walking. Nobody ever does. You mostly see the next hill, the next wheel rut, the next place to find water. Historical interpretation continues to wrestle with how the overland migration should be remembered, whether primarily through emigrant endurance, national expansion, indigenous dispossession, environmental change, or the many overlapping experiences that resist a single heroic story. From your position beside the wagon, history does not feel like one story. It feels crowded, contradictory, human. There is courage here. There is suffering. There is cooperation. There is ambition. There are consequences beyond what any individual traveller understands. And there is a child asking whether Oregon is close yet. You smile. Closer. Technically flawless. The afternoon grows warmer. The company reaches the darker vegetation spotted from the ridge. A creek bends through the land. There is shelter from the wind. Fuel can be gathered. Grass is available. Nobody needs a long discussion. This is camp. The wagons stop. The sound is different tonight. No frantic digging. No shouted warnings. No ropes snapping in darkness. Animals are calmly unyoked. Water is collected. A proper fire begins. Children move around camp under watchful eyes. The sick traveller remains wrapped warmly, but manages a few steps outside. You stay close. The sunset spreads gold across the snow. You notice how quiet everyone becomes. Perhaps nobody wants to say it too confidently. The storm is behind you. Not winter, not danger, not the enormous journey. Only this storm. That is enough. You sit near the fire, heat reaches your face. Your boots steam faintly. The smell of wood smoke settles into your clothing again. Someone prepares supper. A pot bubbles. One child is already asleep against a blanket. The battered doll lies beside them. You look toward the wagon. Its canvas is stained. One rope has been replaced. The wheels carry mud and snow. Inside, possessions have been rearranged, discarded, shared, and reduced. It is not the same wagon that entered the storm. Neither are you. You know how quickly weather can erase a road. You know that a fever can become more frightening than a wolf. You know an ox wandering 50 yards can threaten an entire family's future. You know a dry sock is valuable. A cup of hot water can feel luxurious. A neighbour's rope can matter more than money. And you know that survival is rarely one heroic act. Usually it is a sequence of ordinary people doing the next useful thing. You pull your blanket around your shoulders. The fire settles lower. The children sleep. The patient breathes steadily. The oxen stand nearby. Above you stars appear one by one. You do not need to watch them for weather tonight. You can simply look. The trail continues tomorrow. Oregon remains far away, but tomorrow can wait. For now the wagon is still. The fire is warm. And everyone you were afraid of losing is here. The voices around camp become softer. You let your shoulders loosen. Your breathing slows. The difficult days begin to drift backward, becoming memory even before the snow has completely melted from the wagon wheels. You listen to the quiet crackle of the fire. There's nothing more you need to repair tonight. Nothing more you need to dig from the snow. No missing animal waiting beyond the darkness. No urgent decision. Just warmth. Just breathing. Just the gentle weight of a blanket settling around you. The wagon stands nearby, silent now, its canvas glowing faintly in the last firelight. Beyond it stretches the enormous western landscape, calm beneath the stars. Tomorrow the wheels will turn again, slowly, patiently. But you do not have to follow them yet. You can remain here for another moment. Let the fire fade. Let the voices disappear. Let the cold stay outside the blanket. The children are safe beside you. The sick traveller is resting. Even the stubborn oxen have finally decided to remain exactly where they belong. Your eyes grow heavier. The stars blur gently above the dark prairie. The trail no longer asks anything from you. Not tonight. So you breathe slowly. Listen to the final soft crack of settling wood, and allow the wagon, the snow, the distant mountains, and all those endless miles still waiting in the west to fade quietly into darkness. The road can continue in the morning. For now, sleep. You've travelled far enough. Sweet dreams.